Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Let me tell you about something that happened when I was staying over at my aunt's house in Silver Springs. I was around 11 years old, and I'd gone there to help out for the weekend. My grandparents were out of town, and since my aunt had a hospital appointment early the next morning, I'd come by to lend a hand with my younger cousins. She had to take some kind of strong prep medication for her visit, one of those that keeps you running back and forth to the bathroom. So she decided to crash on the living room couch closer to the bathroom. It made sense. Her two kids, Rachel and Stephen, were there too. Stephen had his own room at the end of the hall, and I was staying in Rachel's room. But Rachel had decided to bunk with my aunt's youngest daughter, Emma, in my grandparents' old room for the night. So I had Rachel's room to myself. As I lay there, waiting for the lights to go off, I tried not to think too hard about how dark the hallway looked. Even back then, I wasn't exactly brave when it came to the dark. I closed my eyes, trying to get comfortable. That's when I felt something brush against my legs. Not hard, just a gentle pawing motion. They had a couple of pets, so I figured it was their cat, or maybe the little dog they had. I sat up, expecting to see one of them curled up at the foot of the bed. But nothing was there. The pawing didn't stop. My stomach tightened. The room suddenly felt off. Before I could call out, my aunt showed up at the door and handed me their new kitten to keep me company. I thanked her, tried to laugh off the weird feeling, and she turned off the light. I cradled the kitten in my arms, gently stroking its soft fur, hoping the weirdness would fade. But then it tensed up. Its little body stiffened, eyes wide, fur puffed out like it had touched static. Then it leaped from my arms, scratching me on the way down, and bolted to the far side of the room, staring at the wall above my head. Not just staring. Fixated. That's when the air changed. It was summer, but the warmth seemed to vanish in an instant. The window was cracked open a bit, and I could hear the normal outdoor sounds. Crickets, a breeze stirring through the trees. But then I heard something new. Voices. Two men, just outside the window. At first, I assumed they were just walking past, maybe neighbors or someone cutting across the yard. But something didn't feel right. Their voices were too strange, not the way people talk today. Their words sounded stiff, like something from an old black and white movie. Curious, I crept over to the window and peeked out. No one was there, but I could still hear them talking. I backed away, heart thudding. I told myself it was just my imagination, probably the TV on somewhere. I climbed back into bed, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and tried to calm down. That's when I saw her. A girl standing in the hallway. My first thought was that it was Rachel, sneaking around or playing some dumb prank. I called her name, kind of annoyed, and jumped out of bed to shoo her back to the other room. She turned and ran. I followed her to the door of my grandparents' room, pushed it open, and saw both Rachel and Emma sound asleep. That sinking feeling hit hard. I slowly shut the door and turned back toward Rachel's room. And that's when I saw her. A different girl, standing in the doorway. She was younger, shorter than Rachel. Long, dark hair that looked wet somehow. Her dress looked old, like something out of a faded photo. And in her hand, she held a long silver knife. The blade caught the moonlight in a way that made it shimmer like glass. The house was completely still. Even the air felt like it stopped moving. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even blink. She started to move toward me. One slow step, then another. I finally found my voice. I screamed like my life depended on it. The lights came on in a flash, and my aunt burst into the room. She looked terrified, asking what was wrong. I didn't answer. I just pushed past her and ran straight into my grandparents' room. Rachel hadn't moved. She'd been there all night. I already knew what that meant. Shaken, I ended up sitting with my aunt in the kitchen while she smoked a cigarette, trying to calm me down. After a few minutes, she stepped away to use the bathroom, and I was alone for the first time since it happened. That's when I felt it. A hand on my back. Not threatening, not cold, just gentle, comforting. I turned around fast, expecting to see my aunt or maybe even one of the kids, but the kitchen was empty. Whatever was in that room, it stayed with me all these years. Rachel's talked about whispers, footsteps, shadows that move where they shouldn't. We don't talk about it much, but we both know something's off in that room. I've never slept there again. What do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? It started when my cousin and I opened a small cleaning business, mostly picking up late-night contracts for office buildings around Silver Springs. One of our regular gigs was this 3-story corporate office complex. Nothing fancy, just desks, cubicles, and fluorescent lights. We were there 5 nights a week, for close to 5 hours each night. At first, it felt like any other job, but looking back, I think the place had always been off. My cousin Melissa used to clean the upper floors with me. Every so often, she'd whip around and say, "Why do you keep calling my name?" I hadn't said a word. At first, we laughed it off. Just background noise, right? Maybe old vents or weird echoes in the halls. But it kept happening, enough that it became a running joke between us. Everything changed after Melissa stepped away to take care of her kids. I brought someone new on board to help with the shifts, and that's when the strange stuff really started. One night, while cleaning the second floor, a foul smell crept into the break room. At first, we thought it was rotten food left in the fridge, but within minutes, the entire floor was filled with this dense, putrid stench, like decaying meat soaked in mildew. It was thick enough to make your eyes water. Then, as suddenly as it came, it vanished. We didn't know what to think, so we shook it off and kept working. Then we heard it, the soft rattle of the double glass doors leading to the west wing. At first, I figured it was someone coming back late to grab something, but no one ever showed. We checked the hallway. Empty. Offices locked. Not a soul in sight. That uneasy silence set in, the kind that makes you keep looking over your shoulder. From then on, we refused to split up. We cleaned everything in pairs. Bathrooms, kitchens, even empty conference rooms. I'd left the key ring, a heavy set of 10 with bright tags, on the front desk near the main entrance. But when we finished and went to grab them, they were gone. Panic hit fast. We tore through the place looking for them, under desks, in trash bins, behind supply carts. Nothing. We couldn't lock up without them, and standing around that late at night didn't feel right. Eventually, we called building security to escort us out. The next morning, the building supervisor emailed to say they'd found the keys. In the men's bathroom. The first place we had checked, twice. From that night on, weird became the new normal. Cleaning supplies would disappear mid-shift and turn up in bizarre places we'd never touched. Phones on silent would randomly start blaring static or music, but only when we weren't in the room. Then came last night. Carrie, who worked the shift before me, called just as I was heading in. Her voice was shaking. She said she heard a woman's voice whisper hi in her ear, but she was alone in the building. She refused to go back upstairs. I told her I'd be there in 10 minutes and brought my Uncle Dave along for backup. The place looked normal. Too normal. Later that night, I took a bag of trash out to the dumpster with Jody, who joined us for the evening shift. I left Carrie upstairs finishing up and went back up alone in the elevator to help her wrap up and set the alarm. But the second those elevator doors slid open, I knew something was wrong. The hallway lights buzzed quietly, casting long shadows across the floor. The vacuum cleaner sat near the stairwell, but Carrie was nowhere in sight. Then, from my left, I heard it. A deep, slow chuckle. I spun around. Empty hallway. A few seconds later, Carrie stepped through the glass doors from the opposite side of the building. "Did you just laugh?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He shook his head. "No. Why?" I didn't answer. We packed up quickly, trying to act like everything was fine. But when we got to the supply closet downstairs, the mop was gone, just vanished. We needed it to finish, so reluctantly, we took the elevator back up. And that's when I saw it. Inside the lift were 4 people. Except, there were only 3 of us. It happened so fast. Just a shadow standing quietly to the right. No face, no movement, just presence. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stayed frozen until we reached the ground floor. Back in the janitor's room, we sat in silence, trying to shake it off. The room was clean, bright, sterile, about the only place that felt safe. Then Jody's voice broke through. The light. Look. The overhead light, a long fluorescent tube hung on chains, was swinging wildly. No breeze, no vents, no doors open. We tried everything, slamming the door, running past it. Nothing made it move like that. Only hands could do that. That's when I decided I was done. I gave my 2 weeks. I'll stick it out, but I won't be alone again. Not in that building. Not after what I saw. I still can't explain it, and honestly, I don't want to. Would you have stayed? I'm 20 now, born and raised in a quiet little town called Silver Springs, Oregon. I've lived in the same creaky, 2-story house on Willow Lane my entire life. It's one of those neighborhoods where everyone knows your name, where the porches are big, the trees are older than your grandparents, and the fog rolls in like it's got a memory of its own. Growing up, I never had imaginary friends or anything strange like that, or at least that's what my mom says. I've never really asked her if I was a weird kid, but ever since I was about 6 or 7, strange things have followed me, not just at home, but almost everywhere I go. And the weirdest part, every single member of my family has experienced something in our house. I've tried digging into the history of the place, but I've hit nothing but dead ends. There's only one odd detail, a worn engraving in the concrete just outside the front door. It reads, Tom and B. Holloway, 1031st/1974, and right beneath that, D. Reinhold. I have no idea who they were, or if they had anything to do with what we've experienced, but it's the only physical clue I've ever found. The first paranormal moment I truly remember happened when I was really young. I don't recall much else from that time, but this memory plays on a loop in my head, clear as day. It was late, maybe after midnight. I woke up for no reason, like something had pulled me from sleep. When I opened my eyes, I saw this soft, glowing orb, white, almost silver, floating just above my bed. It bounced from wall to wall, side to side, like it was alive. I didn't feel scared at first, just confused. Frozen, really. But then this wave of fear settled in, like my body finally realized it wasn't supposed to be seeing this. So I did what any scared kid would do. I dove under the blanket and didn't come back out until I passed out. From that night on, I couldn't sleep with the lights off. I still can't. Those kinds of things happen a lot around here. Weird little moments, like flickering lights when nobody's touching the switch, stuff vanishing and reappearing days later right where you swore you left it. The hallway creaks with footsteps in the middle of the night, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. You catch glimpses of things in your peripheral vision when you're watching TV. Just shadows, always just out of sight. Drinks slide a few inches across the table without anyone touching them. Objects fall or shift, as if someone invisible brushed past. And sometimes, in the dead of night, you wake up and someone's there. Not someone you know. A shadow. A figure. Just standing over you. Watching. It's not just me either. Friends and family who stay over always say the same thing. Something feels off in this house. They may not always see something, but they feel it. And once you felt it, you never really unfeel it. But the most terrifying moment of my life happened when I was 13. It was broad daylight, sometime between lunch and late afternoon. My mom and I had just come home, and I went straight to my room. When I opened the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing inside my room, was a woman. She was facing me directly, her face twisted in a look I'll never forget. Pure, unfiltered rage. Her presence was crushing. The air got heavy. I felt like something invisible was pressing against my chest, squeezing my lungs. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, locked in place, like I was stuck between two worlds. Eventually, I slammed the door shut, squeezed my eyes closed, and ran straight to my mom's room. She didn't even ask at first. She just looked at me and knew something was wrong. My skin had gone pale. My hands were trembling. When I told her what I saw, she didn't hesitate. She stormed into my room and shouted into the emptiness, "Leave my child alone." But deep down, I don't think that woman ever left. For years, I tried to convince myself I imagined her. Maybe it was a half dream, maybe I was overturned, but the feeling lingered. I always felt like someone was watching me from the corner of that room. Then, when I was 17, something happened that shattered any doubt I had left. My uncle had brought his 2 kids over to visit for the weekend. They loved playing in my room. I still had a bunch of old stuffed animals and some glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. That evening, the adults were drinking wine in the kitchen, catching up, while the kids ran wild through the house. I kept checking in on them, making sure they weren't getting into anything they shouldn't. But at some point, I got distracted. Then, my youngest cousin, Andre, only 5 years old, walked out of my room with this strange look on his face, kind of puzzled, like he was trying to make sense of something that didn't quite fit. He walked up to me and my mom and asked, totally casual, "Who's the lady in the purple dress in your room?" My heart dropped. I asked him to say it again, and he did, same calm voice, like it was no big deal. "The lady in the purple dress. Who is she?" My mom and I just stared at each other. I hadn't told anyone about her. Not my siblings, not my cousins, just my mom. So we asked Andrew what she looked like. He said she was tall, with long dark hair and a flowing purple dress. She wasn't scary, just there, watching, like she belonged in that room. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. My older sister Chloe once told me she's been followed by a shadow figure for years, something she always felt was protective. Even my dad saw it once, chased it out into the garage thinking it was a person. My other sister spotted it too, just standing near the garage door at night, watching her in silence. But this woman, this wasn't the same thing. Chloe always said the shadow meant no harm, but the woman in my room, her energy was different. She didn't want to hurt me, but she wanted me to know she was there, that she'd always been there. I still don't know who she was. Maybe she's connected to the house, maybe to something inside it, or maybe she's attached to me. All I know is that house has never felt empty, not truly. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind picks up and the floorboards creak just a little too loud, I swear I still feel her watching. Have you ever lived somewhere that didn't feel alone? I was a full-time college student back then, and to make ends meet, I took a part-time job cleaning an old upscale restaurant tucked away on the edge of town. The place had been around for over 100 years and looked like it had never been fully updated. Creaky wooden floors, dim chandeliers, and heavy velvet curtains that always felt a little too still. My shift started at 5 a.m., and I had to be done by 7 so I could make it to my morning classes. For 3 months, I was there every weekday, just me alone, in that building before the sun came up. The place had this presence. It was subtle at first, a quiet tension in the air. Every morning, I'd unlock the door, disable the alarm, flip on the lights, and turn up the heat. The front windows were always shut tight, and no one else came in until close to 11. Only 3 people had keys: the manager, the head chef, and me. Still, from the very first week, I felt like I wasn't alone. At first, it was just a sense of being watched. Sometimes I'd get a chill on the back of my neck, even with the heaters running full blast. I'd chalk it up to the drafty old building, but then the noises started, footsteps behind me that stopped the second I turned around. Faint ones, like someone pacing back and forth on the floor above me, but I was the only one there. The worst of it happened upstairs. I'd be mopping the hallway outside the private dining room, and I hear heavy boots stomping on the stairs, or the sound of someone sprinting across the floor below. I'd rush down, thinking maybe the chef came in early, but the doors were always still locked, and no one was there. Then there were the doorknobs, turning slowly, like someone was trying to open them from the other side. Shuffling noises from the kitchen, and once, I swear I heard whispering just behind one of the walk-in coolers. It wasn't just in my head. It had rhythm. It felt intentional. The temperature was strange too. Certain spots in the restaurant, especially near the old fireplace and along the basement stairs, were always ice cold, even if you stood there for minutes. There was this pressure in the air, like something unseen was pushing down on you, daring you to move closer. But nothing was worse than the basement. The wine cellar was down there, past a narrow wooden staircase that groaned with every step. I had to clean the glass racks and check the inventory list, even though I hated being in that space. The second you stepped into the basement, everything felt different. The air was dense, almost humming, like there was a low vibration in the floor that crawled into your bones. I never lingered. I'd do what I had to do and get the hell back upstairs. For a while, I told myself I was imagining things. I figured if I didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't touch me. That strategy worked, until my last day. I was standing outside the restaurant around 6:45 a.m., waiting for my manager to drop off my final paycheck. A woman named Jess, one of the daytime servers, showed up early, so I let her in using my key. I stayed outside, watching the snow fall, thinking about how I was finally done with the place. 15 minutes later, Jess came tearing out of the front door, pale as the snowbank beside her. Her hands were shaking as she lit a cigarette, and her breath came in short, ragged gasps. "What happened?" I asked. She looked at me like I should already know. "It's the ghosts," she said, barely getting the words out. She told me she'd heard footsteps, loud ones, right behind her while she was checking the register. Then someone whispered her name, clear as day, and when she turned, something cold touched her shoulder. She nearly screamed, said it felt like a hand that had no body. I admitted, quietly, that I'd been hearing and feeling things too, but always pretended it wasn't real. Her expression went slack with shock. "You worked here, alone? At 5 in the morning?" she asked. When I nodded, she went even paler. "Do you know the history of this place?" she whispered. "They say a man was murdered in the basement during Prohibition. Some say he was part of a smuggling ring. Others think he took his own life down there when the police got too close. But whatever happened, he never left." Later that day, I talked with Linda, one of the longtime staff members. She'd worked there nearly 20 years and didn't mince words. She was furious I'd been left alone during early hours. Then she told me a story that still gives me chills. She and the manager were once closing up late with a bartender. It was well past midnight when they heard something slam into the kitchen door, again and again. When they went to look, they found a serving cart tipped over, jammed against the locked back door like someone, or something, was trying to force its way out. And then the knives. They were scattered all over the kitchen floor, clean ones, dirty ones, even a cleaver, like they'd been hurled across the room by invisible hands. The owners eventually brought in a priest to bless the space, but nothing really changed. The spirits, or whatever they were, stayed. The restaurant even raised its pay rate just to find people brave enough to work there. That day, walking away with my last check, I realized how lucky I'd been. I spent nearly 3 months alone in that haunted place, cleaning in the dark while something watched from the shadows. Now, whenever I step into an old building, I pause. I try to feel the air. I listen. And if something doesn't feel right, I don't ignore it. Because sometimes, what's waiting in the dark isn't just in your head. Have you ever felt something watching you when no one else was around? For the past 5 years, I've been living on and off with my boyfriend in a finished basement apartment underneath his parents' old farmhouse in Pine Lake, a quiet town tucked away in upstate New York. The place has its own entrance off the side yard, a creaky white door that leads straight into the downstairs unit. It's not a bad setup, kind of cozy, honestly. There's a washer and dryer off to the side, some old pipes running along the ceiling, and one door that leads directly into the original part of the basement. That one's been sealed off for years, with a thick piece of plywood bolted tight over it. My boyfriend's been here practically his whole life. He's 25 now, and moved in with his mom and stepdad when he was 6. And in all that time, nothing strange ever happened. No ghost stories, no weird shadows, nothing to even raise an eyebrow. So when things did start happening, we didn't know what to make of it. It all started a few months ago, and for a while, we kept trying to explain things away, blamed it on old plumbing, maybe a raccoon in the attic. But things just kept escalating. One afternoon, my boyfriend was outside sorting out the recycling, like he always does on Thursdays. Out of nowhere, he texted me from the driveway. He said he felt like he was going to pass out. His whole body went weak, like the energy had been sucked right out of him. He sat down on the porch for almost an hour before he could even move again. Later that night, he remembered something weird. Earlier, while walking around the side yard, he touched a small stick, like a charm, almost, hanging from a bit of twine under the eaves of the house. It was dangling just a few feet below where his stepdad had strung up a deer head after a hunt. Apparently, he left it there to dry out. My boyfriend didn't think much of it at the time and just tossed the stick into the trees. But looking back, that's when everything started changing. At first, it felt like someone was snooping around the house. We heard footsteps on the deck, light ones, like someone trying not to be heard. Sometimes the sounds came from the gravel in the driveway or from the little path beside the basement windows. We figured maybe someone was trying to steal tools or check for unlocked cars. So we put up a camera, just a cheap motion one from the hardware store, facing the basement windows. What we saw, or rather didn't see, left us more confused than ever. Nothing showed up on video. No shapes, no figures, nothing moving at all. But the audio? That was a different story. We heard footsteps. Clear, rhythmic footsteps crunching through the gravel and circling the house. We heard jeans brushing together, breathing. And then, 2 voices. One male, one female, talking softly right next to the camera, but just below the threshold of clarity. You could tell they were saying something. You just couldn't understand what. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just someone creeping around. This was something else. Since then, the sounds haven't stopped. Some nights, it's just light tapping on the windows, like fingertips drumming slowly on the glass. Other nights, we hear the basement door, the one bolted shut, rattling, as if someone's trying to pry it open. It always comes from that same part of the wall behind the washer and dryer. Always at night. Always when we're trying to sleep. It's not just us anymore either. A few nights back, one of our neighbors, Ben, who lives a few houses down, was in his hot tub when he heard something pounding on his bathroom door. It was loud enough that he thought someone had broken in, but when he got inside, the hallway was empty, and Ben's nearly deaf in one ear. Whatever it was loud. That same night, around 2 a.m, he said he thought he heard us arguing outside his bedroom window, but we hadn't left the house all night. We'd been curled up watching reruns in silence. Another neighbor mentioned hearing a deep boom, like a pipe bursting under her floor. One time, she said she couldn't bring herself to open her back door because she felt like someone was just sitting there, waiting. And then there was the shadow she saw across the street, a man pacing in slow circles under the streetlight, talking to himself. We've tried everything. Burned sage, lit white candles, drew protective symbols with salt and crushed red brick on every windowsill. We even scattered protective herbs we read about online, mugwort, lavender, cedar. It all helped for a night or 2, but then it would start again. Last night was the worst. It began just before midnight, same as always. A low, deliberate scratching at the basement door. That subtle pressure, like something pushing against the wall behind the laundry machines. Then the footsteps returned, this time heavier, closer, like someone was standing just behind the plywood barrier, listening. I want to believe we're safe inside. I want to believe the candles and the salt lines mean something. But the truth is, this thing, whatever it is, it's not just watching anymore. It's trying to get in, and we have no idea what it wants. In January, I left home for the Pacific Northwest to reset my life and focus on healing. After a difficult breakup and feeling burnt out in college, I decided a quiet change of scenery might help. Through a university program, I signed up to live with a host family in a remote Oregon town called Pine Lake, a place tucked between thick forests and rolling hills, far from the chaos I was used to. The family was simple. A single dad named Mark and his 2 teenage daughters, Ellie and Grace. They lived in an old Victorian-style house that had been passed down through generations. It was the kind of place that looked charming during the day, but turned strangely silent after dark. From the moment I stepped through the heavy front door, something felt off, not dangerous, just strange. During my first week, I started having the most vivid nightmares, twisted creatures, shadowy silhouettes, whispering voices I couldn't understand. At first, I blamed it on the move. New place, new stress. I figured my brain just needed time to adjust. But then things started happening while I was awake. It began with small glimpses. A man sitting on the couch in the living room, always in the corner of my eye. The second I turned my head, he was gone. Just a flicker, a shadow. I tried to laugh it off, told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I wasn't laughing. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. I'd been out grabbing groceries from the town's little market. When I got back, I unlocked the front door like usual. But the second I stepped inside, I heard it. A man's voice. Calm, deep, and steady. It came from the living room near the couch. For a moment, I thought maybe Mark had a friend over. I hesitated in the hallway, embarrassed to interrupt with my still shaky nerves. But then I remembered. Mark was at work. The girls were at school. The house should have been empty. That's when the fear hit. I backed out, hands trembling as I reached for my phone. But before I could even unlock the screen, the voice stopped. Just stopped. And suddenly, the house was too quiet. That thick, heavy kind of silence that makes you feel like you're not really alone. I opened the door again slowly. The living room was empty. That was just the beginning. From that night on, I woke up at the same time almost every night, somewhere between 2:30 and 4 a.m., but most often at exactly 3:15, the time I was born. I didn't set an alarm, didn't check the clock on purpose. It just happened. At first, I'd wake with a chill, a sense that someone was standing in the doorway, watching. Then came the knocking, sometimes on the wall next to my bed, sometimes on the floorboards beneath it. Scratching followed, like nails or claws dragging across wood. And then the pressure, like something invisible pressing down on the room, making it hard to breathe. I stopped turning the lights off at night. I tried closing the door, but no matter how many times I shut it, locked it even, I'd wake up to find it open again. I started to wonder if Ellie or Grace were messing with me, but even when I was alone in the house, it still happened. Desperate, I started going to the tiny white church at the edge of town. The priest there listened, nodded, and quietly told me I should leave, that some houses weren't meant to be lived in, but I couldn't just walk away. I had agreed to help Mark with the girls in exchange for room and board. I had nowhere else to go. And then, one Sunday, everything escalated. Mark was sick in bed. The girls were out. I was sitting in the kitchen, working on my laptop, when I felt it, sharp, tiny teeth biting into my forearm. Human-like. 3 quick bites. I froze. My brain couldn't even process it. I looked down. Red marks already forming on my skin. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just sat there staring. Later that night, I called my mom. She told me to pray to stay calm, to keep a small angel figurine near my bed, the one she'd sent me before I left. I placed it on the nightstand and prayed until I fell asleep. For a while, the nights felt a little lighter, but the feeling never really left. Even in the daytime, I could sense it, like someone was standing behind me, just out of reach. The wind chime by the window would swing violently without a breeze. The lights flickered. Sometimes they turned on by themselves, and more than once, I felt like I couldn't move, like something was holding me down, draining the air from the room. This went on for 9 weeks. 9 weeks of sleepless nights, shadowed corners, and the constant feeling that I was being watched, and worse, pushed out. Eventually, I broke. I packed my things and left Pine Lake nearly 3 months early. Before I left, Mark mentioned something that chilled me to my core. He said he'd been waking up at the same time I had, 3:15 a.m., but claimed he never saw or heard anything strange. Just insomnia, he said. The girls never brought anything up. If anything, they stayed distant the entire time, like they knew something, but didn't want to talk about it. That experience changed me. Even now, back at my own apartment, I still leave a light on when I sleep. I've always believed in the spiritual, had a few strange dreams before, but this was different. This was targeted and real. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had stayed. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Before we get into it, just know, this is one of those stories that still makes me stop and wonder if what we experienced was ever truly gone, or if maybe it just followed us. My fiancé, Michael, moved in with me not long before we finally left that old house in Pine Lake, Missouri. He'd never believed in ghosts, raised in a logical, no-nonsense household where death meant lights out and nothing more. But things started shifting the moment we tried cleaning the place up. The vacuum would overheat for no reason, even though it worked fine after we moved. Stuff would fall off shelves directly onto us. Books, picture frames. Things would disappear completely. One time, an old computer tower that had been wedged under the desk for years suddenly slid out on its own and slammed into my shin so hard I dropped to the floor. Another time, the vacuum cleaner actually flew off the wall hook and hit me in the shoulder. And the noises, God, the noises. Loud thumps from inside the bedroom closet, like fists pounding from the inside. We try to laugh it off. All right, we get it. We joke. But we weren't really laughing. Not deep down. There was one thing that truly got under our skin. Michael noticed it first. Whenever the door to my brother's old room, which we now use for storage, was left open, the bathroom light would switch on by itself. We'd come home late to see it glowing down the hallway or wake up to find it lit. But whenever that door stayed shut, darkness. One night in late January, I was sketching in my room, just doodling in a notebook I hadn't touched in weeks. A neat stack of drawings sat nearby. I wasn't paying much attention until I saw them lift. Page by page, they flipped through slowly, as if someone was rifling through them. The windows were closed. The doors were still. My breath caught in my throat, and all I could do was pull the covers over my head like a kid. I stayed like that all night, pretending it hadn't happened. A few nights later, I was in the kitchen making a bagel, cream cheese, always my midnight go-to. Michael was upstairs shaving before bed. It was around midnight when I heard him shout from the hallway upstairs. I dropped the knife and ran up. His face was pale, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost, which as it turned out he had. There was a man in the mirror, he said, his voice shaking. Not me. Someone else. Short. Bald. Just staring back at me. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but then that feeling came over him, the one you can't shake off, that feeling like you're being watched. I barely had time to respond when he screamed again. This time, he came tearing down the stairs, shaving cream still clinging to his face. He was screaming at me, he gasped, but no sound. Just mouth open, face twisted like he was howling. I tried to calm him down, told him to just finish shaving. Maybe it was stress, lack of sleep, but when he went back upstairs, the razor wouldn't work. He pressed it against his skin, but it wouldn't cut. Then the cold faucet suddenly shot out scalding hot water, burning his hand. We had no idea how that was even possible. He came bolting back down, panic in his eyes. "He's outside," he said. "In the kitchen window. He's out there." I turned, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Michael said the man was smiling, grinning, actually. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, and one of his arms was gone. As I tried to make sense of it all, I called my mom. While I was on the phone with her, I heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Heavy, slow steps coming from what used to be her old bedroom. The air turned cold, like someone had opened a freezer. I felt the pressure around me, like something unseen was standing way too close. "Call your brother," my mom said urgently. "Go stay there for the night." As soon as I made that call, it was like the air shifted, the heaviness lifted, the room warmed. I could finally breathe again. But then, just as suddenly, it came back. That was it. We grabbed our bags and got out, spending the night at my brother's place. We never slept in that house again. The day we moved out felt just as unsettling. My mom had always noticed little things, paper sliding across the floor, objects shifting when she was home alone. But when we came back one last time, after the power had been turned off and everything was boxed up, I walked through the house with my brother's partner to do one final check. When we opened the door to my brother's old room, a freezing wind hit us. Not a draft. This was bone-deep cold, the kind that makes your eyes sting. We looked at each other, said nothing, and just knew. We ran down the stairs and didn't look back. My grandmother always said she could hear the dead. She claimed my aunt could too. My mom believes she has it, and supposedly so do I, but mine's different. I don't hear voices. I just feel things. Sometimes I'll walk into a place and feel instantly uncomfortable, like I'm trespassing somewhere I shouldn't be. Other times I feel oddly safe, like something's watching over me. I don't know if it's real. Maybe it's just the way I'm wired. But I believe, truly believe, that there are things in this world we'll never fully understand. What about you? Have you ever stepped into a room and just known you weren't alone? When my husband Michael and I first got married in 1985, we moved into a cozy little duplex in a quiet town called Silver Springs, Virginia. The place had been in my family for decades. Back in the 60s and 70s, my grandparents lived in one unit, while my uncle and aunt stayed in the other. The setup was modest but familiar. Thick carpet, creaky floorboards, and a porch that caught just the right amount of morning sun. We moved into the side where my aunt and uncle used to live, completely unaware that something else might have never left. It was a late Saturday night, and I was curled up in bed watching TV, probably Saturday Night Live, while Michael was already out cold beside me. Out of nowhere, I heard a distinct click. It came from the kitchen door. Then, soft, steady footsteps crossed the tile floor. My stomach tightened instantly. I froze. My first thought was that someone had broken in. I reached over to shake Michael awake, but, of course, he just mumbled something and rolled over. Our cat, Daisy, however, sprang upright. Her ears twitched, and she turned to me with that look that only cats can give. "Did you hear that too?" Her fur stood on end. She moved low to the ground, stalking toward the hallway like a lion closing in on prey. When she got to the edge of the kitchen, she paused. Then, just as quickly as she tensed up, she relaxed. She turned around, hopped back onto the bed, and curled into a ball like nothing had happened. The next afternoon, my family came over for a little Sunday barbecue in the backyard. I brought up the weird noise from the night before, expecting a shrug or maybe a laugh. Instead, my aunt and mom exchanged one of those glances, the kind that holds unspoken history. My aunt finally asked, "Is that still happening?" I blinked. Wait, still happening? That's when they told me everything. Back when my aunt lived in that same unit, her husband worked the night shift. She used to stay up sewing in the living room, waiting for him to come home. Time and again, she'd hear footsteps walking through the kitchen. Clear, confident footsteps. So clear, she'd call out, thinking he'd gotten home early. But no one answered. No door opened. No one came. The first few times, she panicked. She even ran out the back door once to get my uncle's brother from next door to check the place. But no one was ever there. Eventually, she stopped reacting. It wasn't worth the fear. Whatever it was, it had been there before them, and apparently, it had stayed. After that conversation, things shifted. It was like once I knew, I could not notice anymore. This was back in the pre-streaming era, so we rented movies from the little video store downtown. One evening, Michael went to grab his keys from the bedroom to return a movie, but came back empty-handed. They were right here, he said, pointing to the dresser. Now they're just gone. We tore the room apart, under the bed, inside drawers, even behind the headboard. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it. Jingle, jingle, the faint sound of metal. We turned and rushed into the living room just in time to see the keys fall out of thin air onto the rug. Daisy was crouched under the coffee table, her pupils huge, tail puffed out. Michael picked up the keys slowly, his brow furrowed. They're ice cold. That moment wasn't terrifying, but it left us both uneasy, like someone had just tapped us on the shoulder from behind, then vanished before we turned around. Other times, it wasn't so playful. One sweltering summer night, no air conditioning, just the hum of a box fan. We both woke up around 2 a.m. for no clear reason. We chatted a bit, then Michael got up to use the bathroom. Not long after stepping into the hallway, he froze. I heard him stop, then silence. He later told me he felt someone standing right beside him. Not just the vague sense of being watched. This was presence. Solid. Close. Then he heard it. A long, slow exhale, right by his ear. Warm. Human. Thinking I was behind him, he snapped, "Why are you doing that?" My voice came from the bedroom. Doing what? He bolted back into the room, face pale, heart racing. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. Then there was Christmas Eve. I was about 7 months pregnant, and Michael was out of town visiting his folks. I stayed home to rest, keeping myself busy in the kitchen, making toffee for the neighbors. That's when I felt it. A small hand pressed gently against the small of my back, light but purposeful. I thought it was Daisy reaching up for a snack. I swatted behind me without turning. "Go on now," I muttered. But it happened again, and again. On the 4th time, I spun around. Nothing. Both cats were curled up in the dining area, half asleep, watching me but not moving. The space behind me was empty. I turned back to the stove, but the moment I did, I felt it again, this time colder, like a breath of wind through fabric. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Could you please stop? You're scaring me." And just like that, it stopped. After our daughter, Lily, was born, the atmosphere in the house lightened. Whatever was there didn't go away, but it seemed softer, more curious than mischievous. The strangest thing was her crib mobile. It was an old-fashioned wind-up kind that played a soft lullaby, but it would start turning on its own. No one near it, no one touching it. At first, we assumed it was a mechanical glitch, but it happened too often and always at the same time. Around midnight, like clockwork. Sometimes, I'd be in the rocking chair, holding Lily, and the mobile would start to turn. I'd look up. It would stop. I'd look away. It would start again. One night I whispered, "Can you please stop?" And it did. Over the years, more little things kept happening. Harmless, but hard to explain. The kitchen cabinets would open just enough to notice. I'd say, "Very clever. Now can you close it?" And they'd stop swinging. My shoes would vanish. I'd find one, but never the other, until the day we moved out. That's when I found them. A neat pile of mismatched shoes, right in the center under the bed, stacked like someone had arranged them. There were other moments I've probably forgotten, but the ones I've told you, those are the ones that stayed with me. Whatever was in that house, it never meant harm. It just wanted us to know it was there. Sometimes playful, sometimes quiet, but always there. I still wonder from time to time if it ever followed us. Have you ever lived somewhere that didn't feel completely empty? Back in 2001, my fiancé, now my husband, and I were living in a quiet town called Silver Springs, tucked up in northern Oregon. We had just graduated from college and were floating in that strange in-between space where everything feels uncertain. The wedding was on the horizon, but we had no long-term plans yet. We needed a place to stay temporarily, just until we figured out where life would take us next. My dad had worked in local construction for years and owned a small townhouse complex he'd helped develop on the edge of town. He offered us one of the units at a discounted rate. It wasn't exactly homey, but it was affordable, and at that point, that mattered more than comfort. Still, the minute we stepped inside, something about the place just didn't feel right. The layout was unusual. You entered into a tiny foyer with a narrow staircase leading to the second floor, where the kitchen, living room, and a bathroom with a frosted glass door were squeezed together in an awkward arrangement. Another staircase climbed to the third floor, where the master and spare bedrooms sat, along with a second bathroom with a washer and dryer. A half wall on the staircase was meant to allow more light in, but somehow the entire place always felt dim, like the shadows were baked into the walls. Even on sunny days, it carried a heaviness, like it didn't want us there. From the start, something was wrong. We didn't talk about it at first, but we both sensed it, like the air itself was just a little too still, too thick. We tried chalking it up to wedding stress or the anxiety of transitioning into adult life. But deep down, neither of us believed that was the reason. We had 3 cats back then. All of them had been happy, affectionate, and playful in our old apartment. But once we moved into that townhouse, they changed. One cat hid under the bed and refused to come out. The second, who used to play fetch for hours, would freeze mid-play, staring at empty corners like she saw something we couldn't. Even the third, usually indifferent, seemed skittish. We told ourselves they were just adjusting, but it didn't feel that simple. The energy in the house began to take a toll. My husband and I had rarely argued before, but now it felt like we were always on edge, snapping at each other over the smallest things. I developed a deep sadness I couldn't explain. At first, I thought it was just the usual post-college confusion, but it grew into something darker. I began having intrusive thoughts, spiraling into a kind of despair I'd never known before. My husband grew so concerned he started calling me from work just to check in. He was afraid of what he might come home to. I kept myself distracted with wedding planning, job hunting, anything that could give me a sense of control. But no matter what I did, the heaviness lingered. And then, the strange things started. There were noises, soft footsteps above us when we were on the second floor, and the faint sound of something moving downstairs when we were in bed. Sometimes I'd feel watched, especially in the bathroom with the frosted glass door. One afternoon, while brushing my teeth, I saw a dark shadow glide past the door. My heart stopped. I was completely alone in the house. My husband, calm, logical, and not the type to scare easily, finally admitted he had been experiencing the same things. He hadn't wanted to bring it up for fear of freaking me out, but now neither of us could deny it. Whatever was in that house, it didn't want us there. One night we were playing fetch with the cat, who still attempted to be playful. I tossed her toy up the stairs to the third floor. She chased it but stopped a few steps up. Her entire body went stiff. Her fur stood on end, and she stared toward the landing, unmoving. Then she slowly backed down, never breaking eye contact with whatever she saw. From that point on, she wouldn't go upstairs unless one of us was right behind her, and even then, she'd freeze and stare upward, tail low, ears pinned. The third floor was the worst. That was where the sense of being watched turned into something more. It was suffocating, like walking into someone else's nightmare. I often felt someone standing behind me when I was alone in the shower, and the water never seemed to get warm enough, no matter how high I turned the dial. Then came the bed shaking. My husband left for work early in the mornings, and I'd stay in bed a little longer. At first, it felt like one of the cats scratching or bouncing against the frame. But when I looked around, none of them were even in the room. Then one morning, the bed jolted hard, like someone had kicked the mattress. I shot up, heart pounding, but the room was empty. It only ever happened when I was alone. The fear began to replace the sadness. I refused to go upstairs by myself. We moved our bed into the smaller room, thinking maybe that would help. It didn't. I slept with music on, lights glowing softly in the corners, but the presence never left. It clung to the air. We burned sage. My husband even sprinkled salt around the windows and door frames after reading something online. The peace lasted maybe a day or two before everything returned to normal, or what had become our version of it. Then came the dream. I dozed off on the living room couch one afternoon, completely drained. In that foggy half-dream state, I thought I woke up, and there, halfway up the staircase, was a young man. He wore jeans, a plaid shirt, and had tousled brown hair. He didn't say a word. He just stared. Then, the scene shifted. I was standing in the woods. The air was damp, and I saw him again, but this time, he was hanging from a tree branch, a noose tied around his neck. The tree was in the exact place our staircase now stood. I jolted awake, breathless and sweaty. Something about the dream felt more real than waking life. It was as if he was showing me how he died. I scoured local news archives, searched property records, anything that might confirm what I'd seen. I came up empty. When I asked my dad about the land before the development, he told me the area used to be thick woods with a creek running through it. They rerouted the stream underground and cleared the trees before building. We moved out after 11 months. On our last day, we were in the master bedroom packing up the computer when the desk began to tremble violently. It wasn't subtle. It was like someone had slammed into it. My husband and I both felt it. We didn't say a word. We just looked at each other and kept packing. Maybe it was a goodbye. Maybe it was a warning. Not long after we left Silver Springs. We wanted distance, not just from the townhouse, but from the weight of what we lived with. Even now, when I think about that place, I feel a chill in my bones. What do you think he was trying to tell me? Have you ever lived somewhere that felt wrong? I grew up in a small town just outside of Silver Springs, Oregon, in a house my father built with his own two hands. It wasn't some old farmhouse or fixer-upper. It was brand new, no past, no buried secrets. But even as a kid, I could feel something off about the place. The air always felt heavier inside than it did outside, even on sunny days. I think some houses just remember things, or absorb them. My dad wasn't the kind of man you'd want to remember. He was angry, short-tempered, and always brought this thick, lingering negativity wherever he went. Over time, I started to believe that the house didn't start out haunted, but it became that way because of him. From early on, weird things happened to me. And not just me, my mom, my sister, my brother, we all had something. Some kind of sensitivity to spirits, some stronger than others. What I'm about to tell you isn't just one story. It's a collection of everything that happened inside that house while we lived there. When I was just a baby, I shared a room with my sister, who's 6 years older than me. Years later, she told me she used to see faces hovering over my crib. Floating, disembodied faces just staring down at me. She was terrified. So scared, she'd scoop me up and bring me into her bed just so I wouldn't have to be alone with them. That was the beginning. From that point on, that house never gave us a moment of peace. Everyone in the family had some kind of experience, except my father, who always denied anything strange ever happened. But that house was more than just haunted. It was poisoned. Years of emotional and physical abuse soaked into the walls like water. It fed the thing that lived there. And I'm not sure it was ever just one thing. One of the earliest patterns we noticed were the voices. They sounded exactly like us, our own voices. I'd walk through the front door after school and hear my mom call my name from down the hall. I'd yell back, but no one would answer. When I checked the driveway, her car wouldn't even be there. I'd be completely alone in the house. My siblings had it happen to them too. We'd all hear each other's voices, never my dad's. always calling from somewhere just out of sight, mimicking us, luring us. The feeling of being watched was constant. I'd be brushing my teeth and swear I saw something behind me in the mirror, just a flicker. Sometimes we'd see shadows darting past in our peripheral vision, tall, solid figures that didn't move like people or pets. Our cats were always the first to react. Their ears would twitch, their fur would stand on end, and they'd hiss at empty corners. I'll never forget the sight of one of them growling at a dark hallway, refusing to walk past it like there was something standing right there. We'd feel touches too. A tap on the shoulder, a tug on the back of your shirt. Then you'd spin around, and there'd be nothing there. Stuff would vanish, only to reappear in places we never would have put them. At first, we blamed each other, but it kept happening. Eventually, we stopped talking about it altogether. It was just easier not to say anything. But once we were older, and our friends and even visiting family started experiencing things, we finally started piecing the whole picture together. Things escalated as we got into our teen years. Whatever lived in that house, it grew stronger, more present, more real. It wasn't just feelings anymore. It started showing itself. Our house had this long, narrow hallway with bedrooms all on one side. At the far end, the hallway made an L turn to my brother's room. My room was at the start of the hall, followed by the bathroom, my sister's room, then what used to be our dad's office. The entity had a path, a route it followed over and over. It would drift out of my room, pass through the bathroom, into my sister's room, and then disappear into my brother's. It wasn't a blur or a breeze. It had a shape. A black, smoke-like mass, almost solid. It clung to the walls and sometimes passed through them. We all saw it. We all felt it. The dread became constant. I never felt safe. I never really slept. I used to keep a small hunting knife under my pillow. Not that it would have helped. Some nights, I'd wake up and find every drawer in my room open. Dresser, closet, desk. All of them. Wide open. I always wanted to believe it was a prank. That my siblings had snuck in and done it to mess with me. But they were always asleep. My sister had it worse. She used to tell me about something pulling at her feet at night, like it was trying to drag her off the bed. Other times, she'd wake up gasping, convinced something had been squeezing her throat. Once, she heard breathing, deep, labored breathing, right next to her window. But the window was shut. The sound was coming from inside the room. She ran down the hallway screaming. My mom believed her. My dad didn't. He said it was probably a raccoon or a deer. He even installed motion lights outside, but they never caught anything. No shadows, no animals, just empty silence. Almost every night, we'd hear something on the roof, scratching, pacing, dragging footsteps. But the house was one level, no attic, no crawl space up there. Nothing should have been making those sounds. And yet, the noise never stopped. By the time I was 17, I'd given up sleeping in my room. I moved to the couch in the family room. Not that it helped much. My sister started doing the same, sleeping on the other couch. But she wouldn't tell me why. Then our guests started reporting things. My brother's best friend refused to sleep in my sister's room after he said he felt like something tried to suffocate him. My cousin, who visited during the summer, said it felt like someone climbed into bed next to him, and not in a comforting way. Even our grandmother, who stayed with us after surgery, refused to sleep in my room again. She told my mom that there were faces in the corners, watching her, smiling. The only person who ever saw a full apparition was my brother. He woke up in the middle of the night, hearing someone say his name. When he sat up, he saw a man standing by the dresser, dressed all in white, pale face, bowler hat, cane in one hand. My brother, who never backed down from anyone, told him to leave, just flat out yelled at the man, and the figure vanished. Eventually, we all left. My sister moved to Southern Oregon. I moved to the Midwest. My brother ended up overseas. We thought we'd left it all behind, but the dreams followed. No matter what I was dreaming about, the setting was always that house. Always. I never told anyone, but then my sister emailed me. She said she woke up one night and saw something hovering inches from her face, something black and writhing. My brother, living thousands of miles away, said he'd been feeling it again too. That same pressure, that same presence. That's when we realized we'd all taken pieces of the house with us, not symbolically, literally. I had a chair our dad built. My sister had a cabinet. My brother had one of his old shelves. We didn't know it at the time, but those things were still carrying that energy, that darkness. We got rid of it all, every last piece. Then we got on a call, lit candles, and meditated together. Not to be spooky or dramatic, just to say goodbye, to take back what it had taken from us. And after that, the nightmares stopped. The shadows stopped. It's been years now, and none of us have felt anything since. My father still lives in that house alone. I don't know if the entity is still there, or if we managed to send it back wherever it came from. I just know that it hasn't followed us anymore, and maybe that's enough. But every now and then, I wonder if it's just waiting for someone new to move in. What do you think? Could something like that really attach itself to a house, or worse, a family? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This happened back in the fall of 1992 in a little town called Pine Lake, nestled among the pines of northern Oregon. My wife, Emily, had just lost her mother unexpectedly that September. We'd made the trip up from Portland to attend the funeral and help her father, Tom, with whatever he needed. At the time, none of us knew Tom himself would pass away just weeks later. We were standing in the small, quiet space between two funerals, one we had just lived through and one we never saw coming. Emily's parents had lived in a weathered wooden house built by her grandparents sometime in the 1940s. It sat right in the middle of a dense grove of pine and fir trees, with no neighbors in sight. As far as anyone knew, nothing had ever stood on that land before. The house itself was simple. A large living and dining room stretched across the front, with a kitchen tucked off to the left, and a hallway leading down the right side. That hallway led to a bathroom on the left, two small bedrooms on the right, and a narrow closet between them. At the end of the hallway was a window that overlooked what used to be a back porch, now enclosed and converted into a small laundry room. At night, the hallway turned pitch black. There were no outlets, no lights, and no outside illumination to bleed in, just shadows. The trees around the house were thick, and there were no nearby streetlights or passing cars to break the darkness. It felt like stepping into another place entirely, separate from the rest of the world. The night after the funeral, Emily, her sister Rachel, and I sat with Tom at the dining room table. It was unseasonably warm for late September, and the house had that thick, close feeling, like it was holding its breath. A few dim lamps threw soft pools of yellow light across the dining room, but shadows clung to the corners. At some point, I got up to use the bathroom. I walked down the hallway, brushing my fingers along the old paneling as I passed. Just as I reached the closet door, it hit me. Every single hair on my body stood straight up. A wave of static electricity surged across my chest, as if the air itself had come alive. I froze mid-step. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. It wasn't pain, but it was overwhelming, like walking through invisible electricity. I hadn't touched anything. There was no draft, no sound, just this unbearable tension pressing in on me. I stood there, paralyzed for what felt like minutes before I forced myself forward. Even in the bathroom, the sensation didn't let go. My skin tingled, and my thoughts felt clouded, scrambled. I've felt static shocks before, around electronics, Tesla coils, even museum exhibits. But this was different. This was something alive, watching, waiting. As soon as I stepped back into the living room, it vanished, instantly, like flipping a switch. I found Emily in the kitchen and asked, half joking, "What the hell is in that hallway?" She didn't miss a beat. "So, you met our ghost," she said, calm as ever. Her sister Rachel turned to us, wide-eyed. "Wait, you felt it too." That's when it came out. Both sisters had experienced strange things in that hallway over the years. The icy air, the sensation of being watched, the creeping dread. But neither of them had ever talked about it. Later, when we brought it up to other family members, they all admitted they hated walking down that hallway at night. Every single one of them pointed to the space in front of the closet as the most unnerving spot in the house. Whatever it was, it never seemed to cross into the living room. It stayed confined to that narrow strip of hallway, like something trapped there. Over the next few days, I ran small experiments. I'd walk past the closet, slowly, deliberately, and each time, the electric, hair-raising feeling returned. Not as intense in the daylight, but still there, clinging to my skin. It would follow me just to the bathroom door, then fade. No further. There were no exposed wires, no outlets in that part of the hall. Just old wood and silence. Emily and I started wondering. Maybe something had happened on that land long before the house was built. A death? A crime? Something buried and forgotten. The way the sensation never moved beyond the hallway. It felt tied to a specific spot, like it couldn't escape. When Tom passed away just weeks later, the house sat empty for a long time. And that changed things. The energy started to fade. Every time we came back to check on the place, the sensation was weaker, like whatever had been there was slowly letting go. A few years later, we visited the new owners. I walked down that hallway again, almost holding my breath. Nothing. Whatever had once been there was gone. Completely. Still, I think about it sometimes. That house sat on a raised wooden foundation, about a foot off the ground. I wonder if the earth beneath that closet had been untouched since long before the house existed. Maybe it was something older than we'll ever understand. Or maybe it just needed someone to feel it, to acknowledge it, before it could move on. I've never felt anything like that again, and part of me hopes I never do. But another part still wonders, what exactly was standing beside me in the dark? When Michael and I got married in the fall of 1966, we moved to a small college town called Silver Springs, tucked along the Northern California coast. He'd been accepted into the university there, and we found a cheap apartment on the ground floor of an old Victorian house, one of several nearly identical homes lined up along a foggy street called Ashwood Lane. Locals called them the Painted Sisters. Once grand, the house had been chopped into 4 separate units, but I didn't care. I'd grown up in a plain stucco home in suburban Los Angeles, and living in a Victorian by the ocean felt like something out of a novel. Our unit was made up of the front 4 rooms of the house. The ceilings were high, and despite its age, the place had a cozy charm. Our bedroom sat right at the front, with a bay window that looked out onto the porch. The living room came next, with another bay window along the side of the house. The front door opened into what had once been the grand foyer, just past the original staircase. There was a little triangular closet under the stairs that looked like it had once been a pocket door, but was now sealed shut with a cheap panel. I always wondered what was behind it. The kitchen was oddly the largest room, separated by a glass block wall that the landlord claimed added privacy. Beyond the kitchen was a narrow utility hallway holding a clunky water heater and some old shelves, and at the end of that was the bathroom. Most of the floors were covered in this horrible green linoleum, and the bedroom and living room had thick, itchy green shag carpet that clung to everything. Still, I did my best to make it home. We arranged our wedding gifts, built a makeshift bookcase with cinder blocks and pine planks, and set our little black and white TV on top of my cedar chest. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Michael had classes every weekday and worked nights fixing pinsetters at a nearby bowling alley during lead hours. That meant I was home alone. A lot. I tried finding a job and hoped to enroll in school the next semester. But in the meantime, I spent most of my days by myself. At first, I chalked up the uneasiness I felt to loneliness. But over time, it started to feel like more than that. There was something about the living room that always made me feel like I wasn't alone, like someone was quietly watching me. The utility hallway was even worse, narrow and dim. It gave me the creeps, and I rushed through it like something might reach out and grab me if I lingered too long. Then things got weird. My belongings started going missing. Only mine, not Michael's. A brush, a scarf, a favorite mug. I'd look everywhere, only to have them reappear days later, in the exact spot I swore I had checked multiple times. It was unsettling, but I tried to brush it off. Spring break arrived, and we took a long drive back to Southern California to visit my parents and younger siblings. Being around family was a comfort, and for a while, I forgot about the oddities back in Silver Springs. But when we returned, I felt it immediately. Something was off. I had 4 or 5 hairbrushes, but I only brought one on the trip. When we got back, every other one had vanished. We searched high and low, but they were gone. A few days later, I decided to bake a cake for Michael's birthday. When I reached for my cookbooks, I found the shelf empty. Not a single one left. Hairbrushes, now cookbooks. We tore the apartment apart, searching for answers, but they never turned up. The doors were locked. The windows were painted shut. The landlord dismissed it completely, said no one else had complained, and maybe I just misplaced them. But I knew better. Then came the sounds. At first, faint voices, muffled and distant, like a conversation bleeding through the walls. But the walls were thick, and the upstairs and back neighbors claimed they hadn't heard a thing. Then came the tapping. It started on the sidewalk outside, sharp, deliberate taps, like someone walking with a cane. I peeked through the curtains, expecting to see someone walking by, but there was never anyone there. The tapping became a regular thing, happening every week, then every few days. Soon, it was climbing the wooden porch steps. Sometimes it would pause, then resume, louder this time, right at the front door. I'd fling the door open, expecting to catch some prankster, but the porch would always be empty. Eventually, I stopped looking. Michael thought I was stressed or sleep deprived. I was so rattled I began sleeping with my portable hairdryer running next to the bed. The hum helped mask the sounds. I wouldn't turn it off until I heard Michael's key in the lock. By the end of the school year, Michael got a summer job in Reading, and we moved into a small apartment there. It was blissfully quiet. No tapping, no missing items, no strange feelings. I started to believe it had all been in my head. But when fall came and we returned to Silver Springs, the only place we could afford was that same Victorian apartment on Ashwood Lane. Only this time, the rent had dropped $20 a month. And somehow, that made it feel even worse. Some strange things don't happen in graveyards or creepy old houses. Sometimes, they find you in the most ordinary places, like on the way to a casino. It started on a sunny Friday afternoon. My husband, Mike, and I were headed up to Blue Pines Casino, a small place tucked into the mountains about 45 minutes outside of Silver Springs, Oregon. He was in a good mood, mostly because he just scored a killer deal on a new pair of glasses. Our grandson found this quirky little website where you could get 2 pairs, frames and prescription lenses included, for about $6. Mike loved them. Said they were more comfortable than any he'd had before. I figured I'd order my next pair from the same place. When we got to the casino, Mike did what he always does. He took off his glasses and set them in the little tray where the car's ashtray used to be, right between the front seats. He's always been rough on his glasses, so he's developed this odd little routine of stashing them somewhere safe while we're out. We played for a few hours, slots, mostly, and didn't win a dime, but we had fun. When we got back to the car, though, the glasses were gone. We both did a full sweep, under the seats, between the cushions, even checked the back seat and floor mats. Nothing. Luckily, he had his second pair in the glove box, so he put those on and said we'd search again when we got home. Later that night, after he went to bed, I went back out to the car with a flashlight. I checked every crevice, even felt under the carpet edges. Still nothing. At that point, I just figured they were lost for good. The next day, I was sitting in my recliner, watching one of those cooking shows, when something strange caught my eye. Just a flicker in my peripheral vision, like a small shadow darting across the floor. It wasn't enough to scare me, just enough to make me pause. We've had little odd things happen in the house from time to time. I usually brush them off, but this time felt different. I turned back to the TV, but then I saw something I couldn't explain. In the lower left corner of the screen, something dark started to drip, like ink bleeding down the glass. It ran slowly, leaving a thin, black trail for maybe 6 inches before vanishing behind the narrow table that sits beneath the TV. I got up and checked. Nothing. No smudge, no stain. Just gone. Now for context. The TV is mounted next to the stone fireplace. It has a wide wooden mantel filled with plants, framed photos, and random knickknacks. There's a big split-leaf philodendron that kind of dominates the corner. As I sat back down, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the drip, something else happened. A soft, glowing orb, light blue, maybe the size of a grapefruit, floated out from behind the TV, but on the opposite side from where the black drip had been. It moved slowly, gracefully, weaving through the leaves of the philodendron. The plant actually swayed as it passed through, like something real had moved it. Then the orb vanished into thin air. At that point, I wasn't scared, but I was definitely unsettled. I even whispered, "Okay, what is happening today?" About 20 minutes later, I caught more movement. This time it was near the ceiling, on the same wall as the fireplace. 2 overlapping squares of light were vibrating in place, each about 6 inches across. They flickered so fast it made my eyes water. I stared at them for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was just a reflection from something outside. As I set the remote down and leaned forward to investigate, there was a sudden pop, like a tiny static shock, and they disappeared before I even got out of my chair. Meanwhile, our dog Rosie and our cat Tucker were acting all kinds of weird. Rosie, who usually sprawls out on the cool tile floor, refused to leave my lap. She was trembling, eyes glued to the corners of the room. Tucker was on the opposite end of the spectrum, jumpy, panicked, tearing around like a raccoon had broken into the house. At one point, he bolted through the hallway, past the kitchen, and into the laundry room so fast that he skidded into the trash can and knocked it over. Then he casually strolled back like nothing had happened, trying to play it cool. I laughed and called him a little maniac, but deep down, I knew something was off. Later that night, Mike came home from running errands. He did his usual routine: mail, pajamas, snack, recliner. As he pulled the blanket off his chair, he paused and said, "Oh hey, thanks for finding my glasses, Han," and held them up in his hand. I looked at him like he'd grown a second head. He was still wearing the second pair. "What did you just say?" I asked. "My glasses, the first pair. You found them, right?" I shook my head. "Mike, no, I didn't. We both searched the car. I even went out after you went to bed." He looked down at the glasses, then up at me, his expression shifting from casual to uneasy. "Well, I don't know how they got here," he said, quieter now, "and I don't want to talk about it." I asked where exactly he'd found them. He pointed to the fireplace mantel, right next to his recliner. The same mantel we pass by every single day, the same place we'd have noticed them if they'd been sitting there the whole time. Neither of us would have left them there, and Mike's meticulous when it comes to his routines. Here's the thing, Mike doesn't like to talk about anything paranormal. He believes in that sort of stuff, sure, but he keeps it at arm's length. Me? I can't stop thinking about it. The black drip, the blue orb, the pulsing lights, the pets losing their minds, and then those glasses showing up like they'd never gone missing. It all felt connected, even if I couldn't explain how. I wasn't frightened, not really, but something odd had clearly passed through our house. I can't help but wonder if it followed us from Blue Pines. That wasn't my first weird experience there. Some of the employees have whispered about strange things happening in the hotel upstairs. Ghost sightings, doors slamming shut in empty rooms, even flickering lights in hallways with no power issues. I may never know what happened that day or how a $6 pair of glasses ended up where they did, but one thing's for sure. I'll never look at that fireplace mantel the same way again. What do you think? Have you ever had something vanish and reappear where it should have been all along? My husband, Michael, and I were on our way to Black Hollow Casino, about an hour's drive from our home in Pine Lake, a sleepy little town tucked into the mountains of northern Oregon. I remember we were talking about the ridiculous bargain he'd gotten on his new glasses. Our grandson had found some obscure website that offered 2 pairs, frames and prescription lenses, for under $10. Michael couldn't stop bragging about it, and I had already decided I'd be ordering from there next. When we pulled into the casino's dimly lit parking garage, Michael did what he always does. He slipped off his glasses and placed them gently in the center console tray before locking the car. He's notorious for scratching them, so this had become part of his routine. We spent a few hours there, slots, coffee, a little poker. When we finally returned to the car, his glasses were gone. We tore the place apart, under the seats, inside the glove box, even checked between the cushions. Nothing. Thankfully, he had his backup pair, so he put those on, and we decided we'd do a better search once we got home. Later that night, after Michael had gone to bed, I went back out to the garage. I opened the car door, switched on the dome light, and gave it one more look. Still nothing. I remember standing there, the air damp and still, with the feeling that something wasn't right, but I brushed it off. The next afternoon, I was curled up in my recliner watching a home renovation show when something flickered just at the edge of my vision. A tiny, quick-moving shadow darted across the floor near the fireplace. I didn't jump or scream. These little things happen to me now and then, and I've learned not to make a fuss. But then something even stranger happened. On the bottom left corner of the flat-screen TV, I noticed what looked like a black droplet, like thick oil, slowly forming and sliding downward. It dripped about 6 inches, then vanished behind the console table beneath the television. I got up, pulled the table away from the wall, but there was nothing. No mark, no moisture, just dust and empty space. I sat back down, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That's when I noticed something else. From behind the TV, on the opposite side of where the black drip had appeared, a pale blue orb floated out, almost like a soap bubble but with a soft inner glow. It drifted lazily toward the big philodendron plant we keep on the mantel and passed through the leaves as if they weren't even there. The plant swayed gently in its wake, as though something had physically brushed past it. Then the orb disappeared. At that point, I whispered to myself, "Okay, that's not normal." Maybe 20 minutes later, I saw another flicker of movement, this time near the ceiling. I looked up and saw 2 square lights, maybe 6 inches wide, overlapping and pulsing rapidly. They hovered in the air near the brick chimney wall, glowing in sync like a heartbeat. I stared at them, frozen, trying to figure out what in the world I was looking at. Then I heard a sharp pop, like a bubble bursting, and just like that, the lights were gone. Throughout all of this, our dog, Rosie, and our cat, Tucker, were acting completely out of character. Rosie, who usually sprawls across the tile floor to cool off, insisted on curling up in my lap, something she hasn't done since she was a puppy. Her body trembled every time I moved. Tucker, on the other hand, was on high alert. His tail puffed up, and he skittered around the living room like he was being chased. At one point, he sprinted down the hallway, leaped over the coffee table, zipped through the kitchen, and crashed into the laundry room trash can, sending it toppling over. Then he casually walked out like nothing had happened, trying to save face. I laughed and called him a little drama queen, but deep down, I wondered if he was reacting to the same strange presence I'd been sensing. Later that evening, Michael came back from his walk around the neighborhood. He went about his usual routine, sorted through the junk mail, changed into his pajama pants, grabbed a granola bar, and plopped into his recliner. As he pulled the throw blanket off his chair, he suddenly paused. "Oh, thanks for finding my glasses," he said casually, holding up the missing pair. I blinked. What? These, he repeated, wiggling them between his fingers. You must have found them. He was still wearing his backup pair, so I said, Michael, I didn't find those. We both searched the car, twice. I even went out after you went to bed. He stared at me for a second, his smile fading. Then he looked down at the glasses, as if seeing them for the first time. I don't know how they got here, he said quietly, and I don't want to talk about it. He placed them on the fireplace mantel, right next to the philodendron, the same spot where that blue orb had vanished. It was a place neither of us would have thought to check, and even if we had, we would have seen them. Michael doesn't like to talk about ghosts or spirits. He's the kind of man who believes in them, sure, but he'd rather not give them attention. Me? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The black drip, the floating orb, the vibrating lights, the way the animals behaved, and finally the glasses reappearing like they had never left. It all felt connected, like something was moving through our home just beneath the surface of what we understand. I wasn't scared exactly, just unsettled, like I had brushed up against something that didn't belong here. I still don't know what that black droplet was, and maybe I don't want to, but part of me wonders if any of this had something to do with the casino. I've had odd feelings there before, cold spots, flickering lights. Even one of the dealers once joked that the third-floor restroom had permanent residents. Whatever it was, it left its mark on that day, and honestly, I haven't looked at that mantle the same way since. The night my mother passed away is one I'll never forget. It was just after 1:30 a.m. on August 25, 2011. After years of fighting a slow, painful illness, her body had finally given out. I'd been to see her earlier that evening. She looked fragile, barely herself anymore, but she was still here, still breathing. When my dad called to say it had happened, I drove straight over. I just needed to be there, to hold her hand one last time, and to make sure my dad wasn't alone. Later that morning, maybe around 5 or 5:30, I found myself sitting alone on the front porch. The air was still. The sun hadn't come up yet, but the sky was that soft, silvery gray, bright enough to see shapes, but not yet warm enough for colors. That liminal hour where everything feels like it's holding its breath. I was crying quietly, cigarette in hand, chain smoking without even thinking about it. The grief hadn't fully set in yet. My brain felt like it was floating outside my body. That's when I noticed something across the street. At first, it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Just a man standing still in the neighbor's front yard, right where their old garden used to be. People are out early sometimes, paper delivery, morning joggers, maybe someone walking their dog. But this guy, something about him was wrong. He wasn't just wearing dark clothes. His entire body looked like it was made of shadow. Not like he was standing in the dark. More like the dark was standing in him. Solid black, head to toe. I couldn't see a single feature. No eyes, no face, no hands. Just the shape of a man. Clearly human in form, but utterly blank. Like a cutout or a silhouette peeled from the wall and set loose. And the way he moved, it made my skin crawl. He was hunched slightly, walking slow and careful. Every step was deliberate, like he was feeling the ground with his feet before fully committing. It was like watching someone tiptoe through broken glass, calm, but hyper-aware of every motion. His arms hung just a little too still, his posture too intentional. There was no shuffle, no sway, just smooth, eerie quiet. I watched him for what felt like forever, though it was probably only a minute. Then, without warning, he started to fade. Not vanish, not blink away, but fade like smoke thinning out in the air, slowly, gradually, until there was nothing. I wasn't seeing things. He'd been there, fully visible, not a blur in my peripheral vision or a trick of the light. He was standing there, plain as day, if day had never learned to love color. And then he was gone. As I sat frozen on the porch, trying to piece together what I had just witnessed, a word popped into my head. Shadow Man. I don't know why, or where it came from. I hadn't heard any stories like that before, but that's exactly what he looked like something that stepped out of a nightmare, or maybe one of those ghost stories people whisper about small towns like this one. I've looked into it since then, shadow people, the Hat Man, folklore, all of it, but nothing quite fits. Still, I can't get the image out of my head. Sometimes I wonder if it had anything to do with this neighborhood. The whole area used to be farmland until the 50s. A lot of these houses were built right on top of old barns and fields. The family who lives across the street now has always been quiet, kind folks. But before them, the original owners were known to be odd. No one ever explained how. Just that something about them gave people the creeps. I moved into this neighborhood in the mid-70s. They moved out not long after. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means everything. But this thing I saw on the morning my mother died, I still wonder what it really was. Was it here for her? For me? Was it tied to the land? Or was it something else entirely? I'll never know for sure. But the way it moved, the timing, the feeling it left in the air, it stayed with me all these years. Quiet, but constant, like a shadow stretched long behind me. Have you ever seen something like that? Or felt something you just couldn't explain? When I was 9 years old, something happened that stayed with me my whole life. It's been over 40 years now, but the memory still feels fresh, like it happened just last night. My family had just moved to a quiet town called Pine Hollow, nestled in the hills of upstate New York. We'd left behind the noise and heat of Phoenix, hoping a change of scenery might ease the grief we were carrying. Just a few months before the move, my older sister passed away from leukemia. She was 11. We were shattered. My parents barely spoke to each other. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't around. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if all that sadness, so heavy and raw, opened the door to something else. Something we weren't ready for. Our new home was small and newly built, tucked at the end of a gravel road that backed up to a dense patch of woods. 2 bedrooms. My parents shared one, and I had the other. But what really caught my eye was the old Victorian house that stood behind our lot. It looked like it had been forgotten by time. Peeling paint, crooked shutters, and a sagging porch that creaked with every breeze. There were only 2 other homes like it in the neighborhood, both resting near a shallow creek that wound through the trees behind us. Even before the worst night of my life, weird things had already started happening. I'd hear someone, always a woman, calling my name from the front yard. Her voice was soft and familiar, like someone I should have known. I'd run outside expecting to see my mom, but the yard would be empty. Sometimes she wasn't even home when it happened. It unsettled me, sure, but I tried not to think too much about it. Until that night. We'd been living there for maybe 3 or 4 months. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, the hallway light spilling faintly into my room through the cracked door, and standing next to my bed, so close I could see the creases in his skin, was an old man. He wasn't shadowy or hazy. He was clear, solid. I could see the tiny freckles on his arms, the wiry white hairs on his head, the heavy lines etched into his face. He looked thin and tired, wearing faded denim overalls like something out of a black and white photo. He just stood there, looking down at me. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but the fear locked me in place. My first thought was maybe he was a neighbor, or some friend of my parents who'd gotten confused in the dark. But even that didn't make sense. Who just walks into a kid's bedroom in the middle of the night? My skin went cold, and then the panic kicked in. I started screaming as loud as I could. My dad came running in and threw his arms around me, trying to calm me down. But what happened next has haunted me ever since. As my dad leaned in to hug me, he passed right through the old man. I could still see the man, still standing there, solid as ever, while my dad stood in the same spot. It was like they existed on 2 different planes. My mind couldn't process it. I started screaming louder, shaking, begging, "Daddy, please, turn on the lights." My dad, looking completely confused, went for the switch. The man didn't move, didn't even flinch, just kept staring. But the second the light filled the room, he was gone, like he'd never been there. After that, I couldn't sleep alone for years. Every night, one of my parents would have to stay in the room with me. I know now how much pressure that must have put on them, especially when they were already struggling. I've carried guilt about that for a long time. But back then, the fear was too big, too real. That night changed something in me. It sparked a lifelong obsession with the paranormal. I've read every book I could find, watched every documentary, and no matter how much I learn, I still go back to that moment, lying in bed, staring into the face of something I couldn't explain. Who was he? Why was he there? Was he tied to the land, the old house behind us? Or did our grief, our pain, draw him in? I still don't know. Maybe I never will, but I'll never forget his face, not as long as I live. It was fall of 1987, in the quiet little town of Silver Springs, Pennsylvania. My high school wasn't your average red brick building. It used to be part of an old mental hospital, seriously. After the hospital shut down in the late 70s, the town repurposed the South Wing into a temporary schoolhouse. You'd think we would have gotten used to the vibe, but honestly, there were moments it didn't feel like just an old building. It felt heavy. My best friend, Eric, and I had a long-standing habit of showing up late. That Monday was no different. As punishment, we were told to clean the kitchen area and the tiny storage room connected to it, which doubled as a book closet. The kitchen was right in the center of the school, windowless with only one heavy door leading in or out. Just a dim, cramped space with dusty cabinets, cracked tile, and that closet full of old textbooks and random supplies. Trying to make the best of it, we brought a little portable radio and popped in a cassette, classic rock, hoping the music would help the time pass faster. I sat on a wobbly wooden chair inside the closet, flipping through old binders, while Eric stood just outside, sorting stacks of books on the shelf above me. About 15 minutes in, the music stopped. Dead silence. No static, no slow fade, just gone. Eric and I froze. We both looked at the radio like it had just said something. "It's probably just the tape," I muttered. "They do that sometimes." He nodded, a half-hearted grin on his face, and we both laughed it off like we weren't completely unsettled. We went back to cleaning. Time passed, maybe another 15 minutes, and then it happened. A fork, just a regular, slightly bent, metal fork we'd seen earlier on the counter, suddenly launched into the air, struck the upper cabinet with a loud clink, and dropped to the floor. It didn't fall. It didn't slide. It flew. We didn't think, didn't speak. We just ran. Out the door, down the hall, and into the light of the main corridor like something was chasing us. Our hearts were pounding. A teacher, Mr. Lowell, saw us and asked what had happened. We tried to explain, something about the music cutting out, a fork flying, but even to our own ears, it sounded like nonsense. But the thing is, the kitchen door opened inward, and we've been working right next to it. If someone had come in, we'd have known. No one could have tossed that fork without us seeing them. There was no other way in. And yet, for some reason, we went back in. I'm still not sure why. Maybe we wanted to prove it to ourselves, that we weren't just scared kids. Maybe we didn't want the rumors to start. Whatever the reason, we swallowed our nerves and stepped back into that cold little room. For a while, everything felt normal again. We even started to joke about it. 30 minutes passed, and we relaxed. Maybe we had overreacted. Maybe fear had gotten the better of us. Then a book dropped beside me. I barely had time to register the sound before Eric bolted. No warning, no shout. He just turned and ran like something had grabbed him. I didn't need an explanation. I ran too. Outside, panting and shaken, I asked him what happened. All I'd seen was a book falling to the floor, but his face. He looked pale, like the color had been drained out of him. "I saw it," he said quietly. "The book, it slid out from the shelf. Then it just floated there, hung in midair. And then it dropped." I felt ice in my chest. I'd known Eric since we were kids. He wasn't the type to joke about stuff like that. Not with that look in his eyes. We never went near that kitchen again. Not once. Years later, I ran into Eric at a gas station just off Route 14. We hadn't spoken in a long time, but that day came back to me, like it was waiting for a reason to crawl out. So I asked him, "Hey, did I ever tell you I thought maybe you were messing with me that day?" He stared at me, then shook his head slowly. "No tricks," he said. "That morning was real." Even now, when I think about it, I get that same chill crawling up my spine. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if anyone else has had to clean that kitchen. Have you ever been somewhere that didn't feel empty, even when it was? "4 years ago, my world shifted in a way I never saw coming. My older brother, just 2 years ahead of me, was in a devastating car crash. At the time, he was living in a quiet part of North Carolina with our mom, trying to get his life back on track. He'd always been a steady guy, the kind of person you leaned on. But before the accident, something about him had changed. He started calling me more often, late at night, usually after midnight. The tone of his voice was different, urgent, heavy. He'd ask deep, almost desperate questions about life, his future, and whether he was making the right choices. And then came the stories, strange ones, about our mom. He said she'd been acting erratic, unpredictable. He'd find her outside asleep in the cold, curled up in the dirt under the old maple tree. Sometimes she'd be in his bed when he came home, covered in soil and muttering nonsense. When he tried to wake her, she'd lash out, screaming like a wild animal, eyes wide and empty like she didn't even recognize him. Our mom had never been what you'd call stable, but lately she had become frightening. I had moved out to California for school a few years earlier, partly to get a fresh start, partly to escape the chaos. My brother hadn't been so lucky. He told me once that he felt stuck, like he was slowly being swallowed by that house. I wanted to help, I really did, but I was drowning in finals and working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. I didn't know what to do. Then the feeling came, a heavy, suffocating sense that something was coming, something neither of us could explain. We both felt it, even across the country. And then came the call. It was a few days after Thanksgiving. I remember the soft orange light of my dorm room, the smell of leftover coffee still in the air. The voice on the line belonged to a woman I didn't know. She said she was my brother's girlfriend. Her voice was trembling as she told me he'd been in a terrible wreck days ago. He was in the hospital. No one had contacted me, not even our mother, who lived just a few miles from the crash site. She hadn't even been to see him. I flew out that same night, after calling my dad and tracking down our mom. When I walked into the hospital room, I knew. I didn't need the doctors to tell me. My brother wasn't in there anymore. He was hooked up to machines, his body twitching with relentless seizures from a traumatic brain injury. The doctors told us that when he'd first arrived, he was awake, barely, but able to speak. He had 2 shattered legs, broken ribs, but he was talking. The only info he gave them was our dad's name and a P.O. box address back in Maine. That was all they had to go on. After surgery, while recovering alone, something went wrong. His oxygen levels dropped. No one noticed in time. By the time they got to him, over 5 minutes had passed without oxygen. His brain was gone. They said it was time to let him go. But our mom refused. She insisted he was still there, claimed he moved his fingers when she spoke, said he looked at her, even mumbled her name. None of it was real. Every test confirmed what we all knew. He was brain dead. But she kept pushing, demanding more tests, accusing the nurses of giving up. And then she turned on me. She screamed that it was my fault, that I wanted him gone, that I'd abandoned them. She called me a traitor, a liar, a killer. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. Pure rage. No grief, just fury. A few days later, we were asked to collect my brother's belongings from his car. It was hard enough just seeing it, crumpled like a tin can. But inside we found something that broke me in a whole new way. Shopping bags, a new suit, dress shoes, a folder with onboarding paperwork. He just landed his dream job in D.C. and had gone out to celebrate the night of the crash. He was finally about to be free. I had to return to California eventually. Finals, work, life, it didn't stop. But in my absence, our mother made a decision I never saw coming. With the money she received in a settlement, she had him transferred to a private facility, someplace out in the Carolina foothills, where he's still kept alive to this day, hooked up to machines, monitored, maintained. She told me on the phone, her voice soft and almost gleeful. Now, he'll never leave me. After that, she spiraled. She started calling me hundreds of times a week, leaving voicemails full of blame and rage. Then she began harassing my boyfriend's family, showing up at his parents' house, screaming on their lawn. I had no choice. I blocked her, changed my number, moved apartments. It meant cutting off all access to my brother. And with that, I lost him all over again. The grief was unbearable. But worse than the grief was the guilt, the weight of everything I hadn't done, everything I couldn't change, every silent hour where I wondered if I should have done more. And then came the 3rd anniversary of the accident. It was the night before Thanksgiving. I wasn't crying. I wasn't drowning in grief, just that quiet ache, the kind that lingers around the holidays. I went to bed early. The window was cracked, and the cold November air drifted in. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up, wide awake. The air felt heavy, still, like the room was holding its breath. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, and I knew something was there, behind me, watching. And then I heard it. Persist. It was soft, barely more than a breath, but unmistakable. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned my head, slowly, afraid of what I might see. And then, laughter. Not mocking, not sinister, familiar, my brother's laugh. He was standing in the corner of the room, just beyond the edge of the moonlight streaming through the blinds. I recognized him instantly, his stance, the shape of his shoulders, the tilt of his head when he smiled. But he wasn't solid. He glowed faintly, like light shining through mist. But he was whole. He was himself, radiating this calm, warm presence that wrapped around me like a blanket. And though he didn't speak, I felt his words, heard them in my chest, not my ears. I'm okay. You didn't abandon me. I'm not suffering. You are not alone. All the questions, all the pain I had buried deep inside, vanished. Just like that. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We just sat there, together. After so many years, it felt like we had returned to a place only we understood. Eventually, sleep took me again, and when I woke up in the morning, he was gone. But something inside me had changed. I used to wonder what happened in situations like his, when the body's alive but the mind is gone. Were they trapped? Were they wandering? But now I believe he left that hospital bed long ago. His spirit moved on before the machines ever kicked in. That's why he felt so distant in the hospital. Why his body felt like a shell. He was never there. Not really. And that night, he came back, not to haunt me, not to scare me, but to free me, to let me know I could stop carrying the weight. I still love him with all my heart, and I know, without a doubt, he's finally free, and so am I. What do you think happened that night? Have you ever felt someone you lost was still there, watching over you? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story still gives me chills, even after all these years. It happened on the night of November 1st, 2002, just a few months after my father-in-law passed away suddenly. He was only 54. The loss hit my wife and her brothers hard, especially her older brother, Mark. They just weren't ready to lose their dad so soon. Mark took it the hardest. He threw himself into anything that might explain what happens after we die. He devoured books and articles on the afterlife, near-death experiences, and reincarnation, Then he started meditating, at first just to help with anxiety, but eventually he became fascinated with the idea of out-of-body travel. He tried it a few times with limited success, but he was determined to keep trying. That night, my wife, Emily, was upstairs in our bedroom, curled up in bed, watching TV and talking to Mark on the phone. He was telling her about another attempt he'd made at astral projection. Emily didn't really believe in any of that stuff. Honestly, it made her uneasy. She's had a few unexplained experiences herself, but she prefers not to dwell on them. Eventually, their conversation drifted into more everyday things, family updates, the kids, holiday plans. I left them to it and went downstairs to read for a bit, hoping for some quiet. An hour or so later, I finished my book and decided to call it a night. The house was still and quiet. Our boys, Caleb, who was 6, and Ryan, just 2, were already asleep. At the top of the stairs in our home in Pine Lake, Indiana, there was a long hallway. The master bedroom was all the way at the end, and the boys' rooms were on either side. When I reached the top step, I noticed the faint blue glow of the TV still flickering from our bedroom. I figured Emily had wrapped up her call. I walked a few steps down the hall to peek in on Ryan. He was sound asleep, tucked in tight, the nightlight casting a soft glow across the room. Everything seemed normal. But as I turned around to head back down the hall, it was there. A glowing orange orb, just inches from my face. It was about the size of a softball, maybe 5 inches across. It pulsed softly, not like a flashlight, but more like a living thing. Its surface shimmered and swirled like liquid fire. For 5, maybe 10 seconds, it didn't move. It just hovered there, perfectly still, as if it were watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My whole body felt rooted to the floor. Then slowly, the orb began to drift past me. It floated into Ryan's room, moving in gentle side-to-side patterns like it was scanning. It stopped right above his bed, hanging there for a moment. My heart was pounding. I wanted to call out, but something told me to stay quiet. After a few seconds, it moved again, gliding back out and crossing the hallway into Caleb's room. It did the same thing there, floating, swaying, pausing over him. I stood in the hallway, completely still, trying to breathe. Then, just like before, it floated back out and stopped directly in front of me. This time, it lingered. And then, in an instant, it shot back into Caleb's room and vanished, right through the far wall. Gone. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 or 40 seconds, but it felt like time had stretched. I just stood there, blinking in the silence, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I'd heard stories about orbs before, mostly in ghost hunting shows or weird message boards, but I'd always dismissed them as tricks of the light or dust on camera lenses. But this was real, vivid, impossible to ignore. I wasn't tired. I hadn't been drinking. I don't use any kind of drugs, and I've never had hallucinations. It was real. I know what I saw. Still shaken, I walked into our bedroom and looked at the clock. 10:13 p.m. I got ready for bed, brushed my teeth, and told Emily what had happened. She laughed, told me I was being dramatic, and said it was probably a dream or some weird trick of the light. But the next day, something changed. That afternoon, Emily called me at work. She almost never does that unless it's important. Her voice sounded different, nervous, a little shaky. She asked me to tell her everything again, every detail, especially the time I'd seen the orb. So I did. I told her about the hallway, about how it hovered over the kids, and how I checked the clock right after. I told her, 10:13 p.m. There was a long pause. I asked if something was wrong. We'd had strange experiences in that house before, lights flickering, doors creaking open. We even brought in someone to bless the place a year earlier. Finally, she said it. Mark had called her earlier that morning. After they'd spoken the night before, he'd gone to bed and had a dream, except he swore it didn't feel like a dream. He said it felt like he was there. He described our home in perfect detail, even though he'd never set foot in it. He lived in Kentucky, and we were nearly 500 miles away. but he described the cream-colored walls, the wooden railing at the top of the stairs, the way the kids' beds were set up. He even said he saw me up close, like right in front of my face. Then he said he jolted awake, like he dropped from the ceiling and hit his mattress hard. He glanced at his alarm clock. 1:13 a.m. Exactly 3 hours ahead of us, the time difference between Kentucky and Indiana. It lined up perfectly. We didn't know what to make of it. Mark hadn't told anyone else about the dream, not even his girlfriend. And the fact that it happened at the exact same time I saw that orb. It was too exact, too strange. I know what I saw, and I believe Mark experienced something too, something beyond coincidence. Maybe his spirit really did leave his body. Maybe the orb was him, or something guiding him. Maybe their father was there, helping him find his way. Whatever it was, for a brief moment, the veil between worlds felt thin, and I was just standing there in the middle of it. What do you think it was? Was it just coincidence, or something more? Because I can tell you this, that moment never left me, and I don't think it ever will. I grew up in a small town called Pine Hollow, tucked between the foggy pines and winding hills of northern Oregon. My grandmother owned 2 houses there, places that would go on to shape my life in ways I still struggle to explain. One was a modest cottage downtown, nothing fancy, just a quiet little home where she'd lived after retiring. The other sat alone at the top of Raven Hill, surrounded by evergreens and always cloaked in a sense of stillness that felt too quiet to be peaceful. Both houses were important to our family, but for me, they were something more, places where I witnessed things that still haunt me. I must have been 4, maybe 5 years old, the first time I stayed at the cottage. My dad dropped me off to spend a few nights with Grandma while he worked long shifts. The place was cozy and smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. What stuck with me most wasn't the rocking chair by the fire or the way the floorboards creaked when you walked. No, it was that narrow hallway that led to the bedrooms. At the end of that hallway was a faded blue rocking chair, the kind with worn cushions and paint chipped from years of use. It wasn't particularly special, just an old chair. But something about it always made me pause. That first night, after a movie and some hot cocoa, my grandma sent me off to bed. I stopped at the edge of the hallway, staring down at the chair. When she asked what was wrong, I whispered, "I don't want to wake the old man in the chair." She froze. I remember the way her face changed, how her kind smile just vanished. At the time, I didn't understand. I was just a kid, but years later, I found out that her father, my great-grandfather, had passed away in that very chair. I still don't know what I saw, but even now, I can picture him there, silent and still, just watching. The house on Raven Hill was different. That place didn't just unsettle me. It scared me. From the moment I stepped through the front door as a kid, I felt like I wasn't welcome. It had a long, narrow hallway stretching toward the back bedrooms, where the shadows always seemed to dance just out of reach. That part of the house was always colder, always quiet, and no matter how many lights you turned on, it never felt bright. I used to tell my parents about the things I saw, figures darting past doorways, shapes that shouldn't have been there, but they brushed it off. "You've got an active imagination," they'd say. But I knew. I knew that hallway was never truly empty. Years later, after my grandmother passed, my uncle offered to rent the house to me and my husband for cheap. I figured maybe living there as an adult would help me move past the fear I carried since childhood. We moved in with my younger brother and 2 close friends, Billy and Sam. For a while, it felt like just another old house. But the longer we stayed, the more the past crept back in. The shadows were still there. I'd see them move from the corner of my eye, flickering just beyond the light. We all noticed it, every one of us, but no one wanted to admit it out loud, not at first. Then things started to go missing. Simple stuff, your keys, a wallet, a phone charger. You'd set it down, leave the room, come back, and it'd be gone. You'd search the entire house, convinced you were losing your mind. only to find it right where you left it minutes later. At first, we laughed it off. Just the ghost playing tricks, we joke. But over time, the laughter faded. What once felt like harmless pranks began to feel like something else, something watching. Then came the voices. I hear my husband call my name from another room, only to find him staring at me like I was the one who'd called him. We hear Billy's voice when he wasn't even home, or Sam would swear he heard me calling for him from the basement when I hadn't said a word. It was subtle at first, just enough to make us second-guess ourselves. But eventually, it wore us down. It got under our skin. The house made you question everything. Footsteps in the hall. Whispers behind closed doors. Cold spots in the middle of summer. Little things, but they added up. The worst of it came just before we moved out. It was the middle of August. We'd spent the day packing, boxing up memories and junk we didn't even realize we collected. The house was quieter than usual, almost like it knew we were leaving. I had just walked out of my daughter's room when I saw a figure standing in the kitchen doorway. The overhead light cast a sharp glow, and the living room behind me was pitch black. The figure stood in silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered. For a moment, I thought it was my dad or Billy. The size matched. But before I could say a word, it moved. No, it charged. In less than a second, the thing rushed at me, a dark blur that slammed into my chest with the force of a wrecking ball. I was thrown back into the hallway wall, hard enough to hit the light switch behind me. Pain bloomed across my spine, and before I could catch my breath, the bedroom door at the far end of the hallway burst open with a deafening bang. The same unseen force flew past me, slamming into that room with a burst of cold air so intense it left me breathless. The door swayed on its hinges, creaking like it might rip off. I didn't move. I couldn't. My whole body was frozen, my mind struggling to keep up. It felt like the air itself had thickened, pushing down on me from all sides. Eventually, I forced myself to move. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely steady them. The bruise on my back throbbed for days after. But that wasn't what haunted me. It was the silence. The feeling that someone, had been waiting for us to leave. That it had been patient, just biding its time. That was the last time I ever stepped foot in that house. I don't know what that thing was. I don't think I ever will. But whatever it wasn't human. It wasn't kind. And it didn't want us there. Even now, years later, I can still feel that hallway when I close my eyes. The way the light never quite reached the end. The way the shadows curled at the edges like they were breathing. That house wasn't just haunted. It was aware. And I think, in its own twisted way, it was trying to keep us. What do you think it was? Have you ever lived somewhere that felt alive and angry? I was around 8 or 9 when this happened. Back then, I lived with my dad, my younger brother, my 2 sisters, and my grandparents in a small, cozy house in Pine Lake, Oregon. It wasn't the kind of place people thought of as haunted, but looking back, there was always something a little off about it. My grandma had this weird thing for sofa beds. Every year or so, she'd buy a new one and insist it was the best thing she'd ever slept on. Usually, she reserved it for herself or for my baby brother if he had trouble sleeping. But one night, out of nowhere, she let me have it. I remember being weirdly excited. It felt like a special treat, like I was being trusted with something. The living room where the sofa bed was set up had a clear view of my grandparents' bedroom door. But the kitchen and the door to the garage, those were just out of sight, tucked into a dark corner that always gave me a strange feeling. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m., a time that, even now, gives me chills. My dad and sisters were asleep down the hall, and my grandma had already left for work. She was a nurse with those brutally early shifts. My grandpa always drove her, so I knew the house should have been quiet. Just me, my baby brother beside me, and the others sleeping in their rooms. The silence was thick, still. And then, like a punch out of nowhere, it started. This loud, violent banging coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought maybe someone had dropped something, but it kept going. slamming, over and over. It sounded like someone was yanking the cabinets open and slamming them shut in rapid, angry bursts. I froze. My whole body went stiff. The house was small. You could usually hear a pin drop. How was it that no one else had woken up? It didn't feel like a person. It felt wrong. I wanted to look, to turn my head and peek around the edge of the couch, but I couldn't. I was terrified that if I looked, I'd see something staring back at me. So I did what any scared kid would do. I pulled the blankets over my head like they were a shield and held them as tight as I could. The banging didn't stop. It kept going, relentless. I wanted to call for my dad, but I couldn't force a sound out of my throat. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure something, whatever it was, could hear it. And then, just like that, silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. I lay there for what felt like forever, barely breathing, listening for anything. Footsteps, creaking, my baby brother shifting beside me. Nothing. Not a single sound. And that made it worse. Eventually, the fear turned into adrenaline. I threw off the blanket and ran. My feet barely touched the floor as I bolted down the hallway straight into my dad's room. I curled up next to him and my sisters without saying a word. Years later, when I was old enough to talk about it without feeling silly, I told my oldest sister, Emma, about that night. I expected her to laugh or brush it off, but she didn't. Instead, she looked at me and said, "That house always had something in it." Emma told me she'd seen a shadow figure for years, always out of the corner of her eye, never threatening, never loud. She said it felt more like a guardian than anything else, something that showed up during hard times and quietly stood nearby. Even our dad had seen it once. He thought someone had broken into the house and chased what he described as a tall, dark figure into the garage. But when he got there, nothing. My younger sister, Lily, had seen it too. Late one night, she got up for a glass of water and spotted something standing near the garage door. Just standing, watching. She was too scared to scream, so she started talking, just babbling about homework, about her day, hoping it would leave. After a few minutes, it vanished right in front of her. That's when things started to click. What I heard that night, it wasn't cabinet doors. It was the garage door. That old thing was heavy, and when it slammed, it echoed. Something had been in the garage, something that didn't want to be seen, but wanted to be heard. Emma swears the shadow figure that followed her never caused harm, never made noise, and never scared her. What I experienced didn't match that at all. It was angry, violent, like it needed someone, me, to know it was there. She believes it was something else entirely, and honestly, I agree. To this day, I haven't had another experience like that. I've lived in other homes, moved to new places, but nothing ever came close to that night in Pine Lake. Sometimes I think it was a one-time thing. Other times, I wonder if I just got lucky. Still, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that garage, whatever wanted me to hear it, never really left. It's a strange kind of fear, not loud or paralyzing, just lingering. What do you think it was? Have you ever heard something in the middle of the night that no one else did? Sometimes I wonder when things really started. I'm 23 now, and I've been with my boyfriend, Michael, who's 30, for just over a year. Before meeting him, I'd never experienced anything even remotely paranormal. Ghost stories were just that, stories. But Michael, he's lived in places where strange things seem to follow him around like a shadow. A few months into our relationship, I moved into his small studio apartment just outside of Aspen, Colorado. The place was modest, basically a single open room with a bed, a worn but comfy couch, a TV on a low stand, and a tiny kitchen tucked along one wall. He had it laid out smartly though, bed on the left when you walked in, a little nightstand beside it, and a closet built into the corner. The couch sat at the foot of the bed, facing the TV stand that held shelves full of movies and old video games. A small coffee table split the space between the couch and the screen, and just behind it was the compact kitchen with its humming mini fridge and creaky cabinets. At first, the odd things were easy to dismiss. Stuff would go missing, keys, lighters, even a set of earbuds, and then reappear days or even weeks later in places we knew we had already checked. And Michael is super organized, especially with his essentials. He always keeps his phone, wallet, and keys in the same exact spot, so it wasn't just forgetfulness or clutter. Then came the night we were curled up on the couch watching an old horror movie. There were 2 potted plants on the shelf above the TV. One held DVDs, the other had tall snake plants in it. Out of nowhere, both plants started swaying, like someone had slapped them. Not gently, hard. Then just as quickly, they stopped. We both saw it, and neither of us moved a muscle. Over the next few weeks, other things began shifting. A remote would slide off the coffee table when no one was near it. A picture frame fell flat on its face one morning. No breeze, no windows open, nothing. It wasn't scary, exactly, but it felt like we weren't alone in that apartment. Like someone, or something, was always just watching from the corners. Michael works as a janitor for the local high school, and he usually leaves before the sun rises. That meant I had the apartment to myself in the early hours. Even then, I felt it, that quiet pressure in the air, like someone was standing just out of sight. But it was always worse when Michael was home, almost as if the presence was more interested in him. We stayed there about 4 months before moving into a bigger place that August. It was a 1-bedroom unit in a quiet part of town, with a long hallway that led to the kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and living room. It felt like a fresh start, like maybe whatever had been with us didn't come along. But it did. Things got darker in the new apartment. Literally. We started seeing shadows, at first in our peripheral vision, then full-on dark shapes. Sometimes they would appear in the hallway and just vanish the second we blinked. Other times, we'd be brushing our teeth and catch a figure standing just behind us in the mirror. Whispering voices echoed through the rooms. Soft, almost like a breeze trying to form words. But we were always alone. Then came the bruises. Small ones at first, but then deep scratches. We'd wake up with them, completely clueless as to how they got there. I started keeping track, even taking pictures. I still have them on my phone, even though I don't like to look at them too often. About a month ago, Michael had a dream. At least, that's what he called it. He said he woke up in the middle of the night, unable to move, like something was pushing down on him, pinning him to the mattress. The next night, he showed me his silver ring. It had bent perfectly against the underside of his finger, as if something heavy had crushed it while it was still on his hand. That's when he told me something I'd never heard before. Years ago, Michael had gone to see a psychic. The woman told him he was being followed by a spirit, his little sister, who died when she was just a baby. He didn't believe it at first, but when he asked his mom, she confirmed it. A daughter lost before Michael was even old enough to remember. Now, I can't stop thinking about it. Is it really her? Is his sister trying to protect him? Or is it something else entirely? Something darker that latched onto him long ago and refuses to let go. I still don't know. But sometimes when the lights are off and everything is quiet, I feel it near us. Watching. Waiting. What do you think? Could it really be his sister? Or have we brought something else into this home? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? I've lived in this house with my mom for several years now, and over time, we've both come to agree. There's something about this place that just doesn't sit right. We live in a quiet little town called Pine Hollow, tucked somewhere between cornfields and old backroads in Indiana. It's the kind of neighborhood where folks wave from their porches, and nothing out of the ordinary ever really happens. Certainly not the kind of place you'd expect to be haunted. And as far as we know, no one has ever died in this house. But from the very first week we moved in, things started happening. I was only 5 when I had my first strange experience. It happened in what used to be my bedroom. A tiny, square-shaped room just big enough to squeeze in a twin bed, a small dresser, and an old rocking chair my grandma gave me. One night, I woke up without knowing why. I blinked the sleep from my eyes and found myself staring at the doorway, and then I froze. Suspended in midair, literally hanging with nothing holding it up, was my old bear costume. I used to call it my cat suit because it had little ears on the hood. But that night, it wasn't playful or cute. It was just floating, perfectly still. I was too scared to move or even breathe. I pulled the covers over my head like a shield and forced myself back to sleep. I've never seen anything like it again, but I've never forgotten that night. A couple years later, something else happened, this time in the living room. The space was pretty open. We had a sagging old couch pointed at the TV, which sat in the corner, and a cluttered bookshelf next to the hallway door. That day, my mom was cleaning. She was a smoker, and after years of it, the nicotine had made the books stick to the shelves. Some of them were so stuck you'd have to peel them off. So instead, she usually just dusted around them. I was upstairs when I suddenly heard her scream. I raced down to find her clutching her neck, standing in the middle of a mess of books scattered all over the hardwood floor. She was pale, shaken, and swore the books had been thrown at her. Not just fallen, thrown. And she hadn't touched the shelf. But the thing is, those books shouldn't have moved. They were practically glued to the wood, and the shelves were deep, so for them to fall, they would have had to slide forward first. The laws of physics didn't explain it. No draft, no bump, no reason. Just force. Violent, unseen force. The next event happened when I was about 13, though this one was something my mom experienced. It was a rough time, a lot of tension in the house. We were dealing with family drama, money issues, and the kind of emotional heaviness that clings to the walls like smoke. The air just felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. One night, my mom was standing at the upstairs window smoking. That window faces the neighbor's house, and when the lights are on, you can sort of see into each other's landings through the glass. As she looked out, something caught her eye. A little girl. A young girl with curly brown hair and a faded yellow dress walked across our hallway, right behind her, and vanished into my room. My mom froze. Every hair on her neck stood up. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a reflection. A kid from next door. The next morning, she asked our neighbor if her daughter had been up late, but the woman just shook her head. Her daughter had been out of town with her dad that weekend. The house next door had been empty. Years have passed since then, and mostly, the house has quieted down. But every once in a while, something changes. I'll come home, step through the front door, and feel like I've walked into someone else's nightmare. Like the air itself is warning me, something's not right here. It's hard to explain. There's no sound, no shadows, just this overwhelming rawness that settles deep in my gut. Some days it makes me physically nauseous, and it always starts in the same place, my old bedroom. We don't use it anymore. It's become a storage room now, full of laundry baskets, old photo albums, and stuff we don't need but can't throw away. But that room, it still feels wrong. The air is thick in there, cold, unwelcoming. And whenever I go inside, there's this invisible pressure, like I'm intruding. There have been moments where I've dropped what I was doing and walked straight out without a word. It's like something in there whispers, "You shouldn't be here." And we never close the door to that room. Not anymore. It's like part of us believes that if we shut it, we might trap something inside. Or worse, lock ourselves in with it. I don't know what it is, but that room, it's not empty. What do you think? Have you ever felt like a room didn't want you there? Sometimes my pets refuse to go near that hallway, and honestly, I can't blame them. There's just something off about that part of the house, like the air changes when you get close. Heavier, colder, almost like it's warning you to stay away. We moved into that place in 1987. It was an old rental home built back in the 50s, tucked away in a quiet corner of Silver Springs, Colorado. The neighborhood had charm, weathered fences, tall oak trees, and a kind of stillness that made it feel frozen in time. But beneath that surface was something else. People whispered about strange happenings, shadows moving where they shouldn't, lights flickering for no reason, like the town itself carried secrets buried deep in its soil. From the day we unpacked, things felt wrong. My sister, Emily, swore someone kept sitting on the edge of her bed at night. She'd wake up with the mattress dipping beside her, but no one was ever there. My dad, Michael, started seeing a shadowy figure trailing him, especially when he went out for his evening walks. It wore a dark hood and never made a sound, just followed a few steps behind. My mom, Linda, would lose everyday things, her watch, her keys, only to find them later in the weirdest places, like inside the fridge or tucked into the pages of a cookbook she hadn't touched in weeks. The activity picked up over time. By 1995, my dad had moved out. The stress was too much for him, I think. So it was just Mom, Emily, my brother Ryan, and me. That's when things got even stranger. Emily often stayed home alone during the afternoons, and she began hearing things. Sharp bangs from the kitchen, the scraping of furniture being dragged, plates clattering, even though no one was near the sink. She'd sprint to our mom's bedroom just to feel safe enough to fall asleep, and I understood why. There was something about the stairs and the upstairs hallway that none of us liked. We didn't talk about it, not directly, but we all treated it the same way. If you had to turn off the light on the landing, you did it fast and bolted. If you had to use the bathroom at night, you held it as long as you could. And when you finally gave in, you moved fast, like something might grab you if you lingered too long. Eventually, Ryan and Emily moved out and started families of their own. It was just Mom and me in that old house. She finally landed a steady job at a diner across town, which meant most mornings I was alone from 5 in the morning until noon. That's when I really started to notice just how strange things had gotten. One morning, right after she left for work, I decided to crawl back into bed for a bit. The house was quiet, still dark from the early morning haze. I had barely shut my eyes when I heard it, banging, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone running up the stairs. Not casually walking, running. I knew that sound. Each step in our house had a rhythm. The groan of the top stair, the softer ones in the middle, and then that last loud creak. It was a sound you didn't forget. I figured maybe Mom had come back for something she forgot. But the sound just stopped. No doors opening. No footsteps back down. Nothing but silence. A few years earlier, we'd had someone try to break in, so I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and called her right away. She picked up fast and said she was already nearly at work. She hadn't turned around. She promised the door was locked when she left. And then, as I sat there, phone still in hand, it happened again. Those footsteps, creaking, thudding, coming up the stairs, but no one ever appeared. I don't know how I managed it, but after maybe 30 minutes of sitting there frozen in place, I eventually drifted back to sleep. Exhaustion, maybe. Denial, definitely. The years that followed were quieter. Whatever was there didn't leave, but it seemed to settle. Still, every now and then, something would vanish and reappear days later. A rain, a pair of shoes, a coffee mug. We'd all stopped bothering to question it. But the feeling, that presence, never went away. Even now, I wonder if it was something tied to the house itself, or something that latched onto us, following us no matter where we go. What do you think? Could something like that stick with a family? Have you ever felt like something was still there, even after the footsteps stopped? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Before we begin, just know this story has stuck with me for years. And if you've ever lived in a house where something didn't feel quite right, maybe this will sound a little too familiar. We used to live in a quiet, 2-story house just outside of Silver Springs, one of those sleepy little towns where the trees outnumber the people and everyone knows your name. It looked ordinary enough. White siding, picket fence, wind chimes on the porch. But something inside that house didn't rest easy. It started with the attic. We'd hear soft thuds from up there at night, sometimes a slow, dragging scrape like furniture being shifted across the floor. And every now and then, this faint tapping, like someone knocking gently from the inside. We tried to explain it away. Old house noises, pipes, the wind. But deep down, we knew it was something else. Then there were the smells. Weird, sour scents that drifted in and out of rooms for no reason. Not mildew, not food, just wrong. And then, as suddenly as it started, everything went quiet for a while. But peace never lasts. One afternoon in late autumn, my mom and I came back from the grocery store, and the moment we stepped inside, we heard it. A steady drip above the back door. At first, we thought it was rain leaking through the roof. But when we listened closer, we heard water rushing through the pipes upstairs. Panicked, we ran to the bathroom and found the taps on full blast, sink filled to the brim, water spilling over the sides. The plug had been jammed in tight. We locked the house before we left. No one else had a key. No windows open. No sign of forced entry. Still, we cleaned up and tried to convince ourselves it was a fluke. But then it happened again. A couple of years later, same bathroom. This time the plug wasn't in, so the water drained away. No damage, but just as unsettling. That was the turning point. After that, the strange things came more often. I started seeing things at night. At first, I thought it was sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming, just my mind playing tricks. But my mom saw them too. One night I stared at the curtains and saw huge, insect-like creatures crawling up them. They moved slowly, deliberately. They were far too large to be real. I couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. And then, just like that, they'd vanish. Then came the spider. It was around 1 a.m. I was looking out my bedroom window, and I saw something moving along the hedge that wrapped around our backyard. It looked like a spider, but its legs were impossibly long, and it glided across the top of the hedge like it weighed nothing at all. I blinked, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, until my fiancé, who had always been a complete skeptic, saw it too. I still remember the way he froze, the disbelief in his eyes. That was in 2009, and he never questioned the paranormal after that night. Over time, other things started appearing. A man, or half of one, really. He would materialize in the center of my room. Torso, arms, head. No legs. It was like he was walking up from the floor itself. My room sat directly above the staircase, which only made it more disturbing, like he was climbing from somewhere beneath the house. Sometimes I'd wake up and find a face just inches from mine. No sound. No movement. Just eyes. Watching. Then gone. As the years went on, the disturbances got physical. Items flew off shelves. Lights flickered and died. My laptop would turn on by itself in the dead of night, something it has never done since we left that place. And the beds. Oh man, the beds. My mom and I both had our blankets yanked off us while we slept. It started gentle, like a tug at the foot. But over time, it became violent. I remember clenching the blanket with both fists one night, feeling it being pulled so hard I thought I'd lose it. Whatever it was strong. Then came the worst part, the smell. For weeks, the house reeked of rotting meat. We scoured the place. Nothing. At the same time, flies appeared. Hundreds of them. No open windows, no trash out. Just buzzing clouds of black, crawling across the windows, then gone. And then, like flipping a switch, everything stopped. We moved out not long after. I've never experienced anything like that since. Whatever haunted that house, it stayed behind. What do you think? Have you ever felt something watching you, even when you're alone? I'm 22 now, an only child, and I work in a small-town funeral home just outside of Silver Springs, Oregon. My earliest brush with the strange started when I was really little, back when my parents first moved into the house we still live in today. I was around 2 years old when I began telling my mom that a lady named Rose wouldn't let me sleep. She thought it was just my imagination, some toddler dream. But that changed after she had a casual chat with one of our neighbors. Apparently, the previous owner of the house had been a bitter old woman named Rose. She lived and died in that very room. As I got older, the strange things didn't stop. On Christmas Eve when I was 5, I remember going to bed like always, but waking up sometime past midnight. My eyes wouldn't fully open, like something was holding them half shut. Still, I could see enough. There, at the foot of my bed, was this white mist drifting up and down, side to side. At the time, I thought maybe it was Santa Claus. Looking back now, I know it wasn't. Fast forward to when I was about 10. I was riding my scooter down Maple Hollow Road, just a couple blocks from our house. There's a row of old colonial homes there, big, weathered houses with stone chimneys and ivy climbing the siding. As I passed the first house, I saw her. A young woman sitting in an upstairs window, dressed in a long white nightgown, her hair falling in soft waves past her shoulders. She wasn't moving. She just sat there smiling at me, staring. Her gaze felt too still, too deliberate. I turned to my parents, who were walking behind me, and tried to point her out, but they couldn't see her. They looked and saw nothing. I kept looking back, watching her watch me. Her head didn't move, but her eyes followed. I wasn't scared, just confused. I never saw her again. When I was 12, my parents added a new section to the house, expanded the kitchen, and tore down the old detached garage. That's when things changed. The house felt heavier, like the air got thicker somehow. My mom always believed a previous owner had lost a baby, and that the spirit still lingered. We never found any proof, but something shifted during construction. That's when the small stuff started. I had this old lamp by my bed with a crinkly paper shade. You couldn't brush past it without hearing that soft, scratchy sound. But at night, when no one was near it, I'd hear it, rustling softly, then shaking violently. One night, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, and the room filled with this intense pressure. My bedroom door creaked open slowly, and the lamp started trembling so hard I thought it would fall over. I screamed for my mom. She swapped rooms with me that night, but the weirdness followed her too. She started waking up to her bed shaking, sometimes even lifting slightly off the floor. She stopped letting me rearrange the furniture in my room because every time I did, things got worse. The activity always came back stronger. When I was 19, my dad's best friend passed away. A month later, I was getting ready to head out. I just slung my bag over my shoulder when I felt something shift in the air. You know that feeling when someone's standing behind you? It was like that, but colder. I turned toward the kitchen, and there he was, my dad's friend, just standing there in the doorway, expression soft. He didn't seem angry or anything, just there. But before I could react, our dog bolted past me and started barking like crazy. His fur bristled, teeth bared. That's when I ran. I shot up the stairs and told my mom. She barely blinked, just nodded like she'd been expecting it. Then things took a darker turn when I was 21. One morning, my mom vanished. No note, no call, just gone. When she finally came back days later, she wouldn't speak to me or my dad. The house felt wrong. The air was heavy again, almost oppressive. My dad and I tried to keep things normal. One night we went out for a drink, and I ended up crashing at a friend's place for a bit. When I got home later that night, the atmosphere hit me like a wall. The dog wouldn't come upstairs. He just stood at the bottom step, growling low in his throat. I started hearing noises, banging downstairs, slow shuffling outside my bedroom door. Then silence. A few minutes later, the front door creaked open. I thought my parents were back, but it was my grandmother. She looked furious and told me to get in the car. That's when she told me the truth. My mom had run off with another man. That same week, weird things started happening to the rest of the family. My grandma, my aunt, and even my dad began experiencing strange ear-related sounds. Ringing, clicking, soft whispers just out of reach. My grandma believed it was my grandfather, who had died when I was 5. My aunt's house began having its own unexplained activity, but that's a story for another day. The most recent experience happened at work. I was filling in for a Saturday shift at one of our larger funeral homes in Ash Grove, about 30 minutes from Silver Springs. The building was huge, older than most, but everything seemed normal. Until I reached the viewing chapels. The first few rooms were fine, but when I stepped into the fourth one, the temperature dropped instantly. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt a pit in my stomach, pure dread. I didn't want to go inside, but I had no choice. We were prepping for several viewings. Later, another staff member asked if I'd felt anything strange in that room. She said once she went to check it during her break and saw a man sitting in one of the back chairs. He looked solemn, like he was grieving. She didn't say anything to him, just gave him privacy. When she asked the others about it later, no one knew who she was talking about. No visitors had signed in. No families had been there that day. She went back to the chapel, and the chair was empty. I'm still trying to make sense of everything. My grandma swears it's a family gift. She says she can hear the dead. My aunt too. Even my mom. Supposedly, I have it, but it's not like that for me. I don't hear voices. I just feel things. I'll walk into a room and instantly know whether I'm welcome or not. Is it real? Is it all in my head? I don't know. But I do believe that some things can't be explained by logic alone. What about you? Have you ever felt something you just couldn't explain? I want to start by sharing something that happened when I was just 3 years old. We were living in a quiet town called Pine Lake, tucked between a couple of forested hills and an old 2-lane highway. My parents always told me I used to talk about a woman, an old woman, who would stand halfway up the stairs in our house. At first, they thought it was just a toddler's imagination. Kids say strange things all the time, right? But then, something changed. I started drawing. Nothing complicated, just little scribbles on printer paper. My parents didn't pay much attention to it at first, until they noticed I was drawing the same thing again and again. Every single picture showed the same thing, a figure of a woman, completely blacked out, standing on the staircase. No face, no features, just a dark silhouette. After that, things started falling apart. My parents' friends stopped coming over. People they'd known for years suddenly seemed distant, angry even, for reasons no one could explain. The house grew tense, heavy, like something was pressing down on all of us. Eventually, things got so bad we had to move. It was like the life we built was coming apart at the seams. And to this day, I can't help but wonder, did it all start with her? That figure on the stairs? The second time something happened, I was 9 years old. It was a bitter cold winter night, the kind where the wind whistles through the trees and the whole house creaks just a little too much. My parents had friends over for dinner, and I remember being so tired I put myself to bed early. Sometime around 10 p.m., I woke up, and I just knew something was wrong. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, and suddenly I felt it, a presence, heavy, dark, like it was weighing down the air around me. My whole body froze. I couldn't breathe right. The warmth in the room had vanished, replaced by the sharp, bitter cold that sunk straight into my skin. It felt like something was draining the energy right out of me. I was terrified. I kept telling myself to turn around, that I had to see it, whatever it was, but my instincts screamed, "Don't move." Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I forced myself to turn, and there it was. A tall, shadowy figure, standing inches from my bed, staring straight at me. It didn't speak. It didn't move. Just stood there, silent, unmoving. I was completely frozen, not asleep, not dreaming. I knew I was awake. I stared until I couldn't take it anymore, then squeezed my eyes shut and gripped my pillow like it was the only thing tethering me to safety. I stayed like that for what felt like forever. When I finally opened my eyes again, it was gone, but the room was still cold, and I knew then I hadn't imagined any of it. The third experience, well, it's still happening. It started about a year ago. I don't know if it's a ghost trying to get my attention or if someone's just playing a twisted game, but whatever it is, The timing is too perfect. It's happened 12 times now. Every single time I go to the window in my room to take a break, tap. A small rock hits the glass. Always just one. And every time I look outside immediately. Nothing. The only direction the rock could come from is the left side, where the woods begin. I check that way first every single time, but it's always empty. No footprints, no rustling, not even a shadow, just stillness. One night I was watching YouTube, standing near the window. Out of nowhere, the video paused. I didn't touch anything. A few seconds later, tap. Rock against glass. I ran to the window so fast I nearly knocked over my lamp. But again, no one, no movement, just silence. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something's really out there watching, waiting. But I've come to believe there are things in this world we'll never understand, things that follow us, even when we think we've left them behind. What do you think? Have you ever felt something like this? Before we begin, remember, this story is told in a calm, personal tone, like a friend confiding something they're still trying to process, designed for a USA audience. Let's begin. Underscore 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 underscore. I moved to Silver Springs, Oregon, early last year with a few close friends. We'd been living in Portland, but I needed to relocate for college, and time was tight to find a place before the spring semester started. House hunting in a small town turned out to be harder than expected. Most landlords weren't exactly thrilled about renting to 420-somethings all at once. Eventually, we met a real estate agent named Jessica, kind, soft-spoken, and just a little offbeat. She showed us a few places, but there was one house she saved for last. I remember the hesitation in her voice as we pulled into the driveway. But the second we walked through the door, we knew. It was perfect. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, an old clawfoot tub in the upstairs bathroom. It had charm. Quiet, a little creaky, but full of character. Oddly, getting the lease approved took almost no time at all. After struggling for weeks, it almost felt too easy. That's when Jessica told us the place had been sitting empty for over a year. Nobody had even applied. Not once. We laughed it off. Must be haunted, someone joked. But no one took it seriously. That changed pretty quickly. From the first night, something felt off. Not terrifying, exactly. More like a quiet pressure, like the air itself was watching me when I was home alone. It got to the point where I couldn't relax. So I adopted a cat from the local shelter. A gray tabby I named Henry. I told myself he'd keep me company. But things didn't get better. They got weirder. The first real incident happened to my housemate Adam. One night he woke up around 3 a.m. to find someone, or something, standing at the foot of his bed. A glowing figure, completely still. He said it looked like a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Her face was shadowed, but the rest of her shimmered with pale, unnatural light. I wouldn't have believed him if he hadn't taken a picture. He showed it to me the next morning. Sure enough, there she was. You could clearly see the outline of a little girl, glowing softly against the darkness. But her face was covered by a dark square, like some glitch in reality. We tried everything. Flashlights, filters, night mode photos, but we could never recreate it. Not even close. Even then, I wasn't totally convinced. Until Domi had her own experience. She'd stayed home alone one night while the rest of us were out. She told me she was getting ready for bed when she heard the bathroom door slam shut. Hard. She froze. She was certain she'd already closed it. Too scared to check, she dove under the covers and squeezed her eyes shut. Then through her eyelids, she saw it. A blinding white flash, like lightning, inside the room. But instead of fear, she felt peace. His strange calm settled over her, and before she could even think about it, she drifted off to sleep. A few weeks later, it was just Domi and me at the house, sitting on the couch watching old My Chemical Romance videos online. Henry was curled up in my lap, half asleep. Adam was out with his girlfriend, and my boyfriend Tony had gone to grab groceries. Then it happened. The unmistakable sound of the cat food box being shaken in the kitchen. We both froze. Henry's ears perked up. His body tensed, staring at the kitchen like he was hunting something invisible. We didn't say a word. We just ran, straight out the front door, barefoot and panicked. We made it to the sidewalk just in time to see Tony's headlights turning down the street. The timing was almost too perfect. That's when I started to believe. More things happened after that. I saw a man, tall, broad-shouldered, standing in the shadows near the stairs, watching. We think he might be the girl's father. Tony says he's seen them both. The girl feels harmless, maybe even protective. But the father? There's something wrong about him. Heavy, angry, cold. We started hearing things. Footsteps upstairs, whispers behind closed doors, sudden bangs that shook the windows. So one night we tried something reckless. We held a seance. We sat in a circle, candles flickering, fingers lightly touching. When the spirit responded, it spelled out my initials. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. If anything, I felt known, like something was trying to say, I see you too. Since moving into this house, my whole belief system has changed. I used to laugh at ghost stories. Now, I think twice before I do. Because sometimes, even when you feel alone, you're not. And honestly, after everything that's happened here, I'm starting to wonder, could there be something following me to work too? What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me start by saying, my name is Luke, and this is something I've never told anyone outside a close circle. Whether you believe in God, the supernatural, or anything in between, that's entirely up to you. All I know is, what happened to me was real, and it changed everything. I was 20 when I decided to turn my life around. After years of feeling lost and angry, I started going to church in my hometown, Silver Springs, Virginia. It was a small, quiet place surrounded by woods and foggy mornings. The kind of town where everyone knows your name, but not your secrets. Faith gave me peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose. I believed in the good, guardian angels, signs, prayers being answered. But I also believed in the bad, that there's something darker out there, something that waits in silence, drawn to those who wander too far into places they shouldn't. And that's exactly what I did. I started researching the occult, not because I wanted to be part of it, but because I thought I could help people who were caught in it. I told myself I was doing a good thing, learning the signs, the symbols, the hidden meanings. But the deeper I went, the more I felt something was watching me. I read about rituals, spells, things I'd rather forget, writings from people long dead, people who'd tapped into something they never should have. Even now, saying their names out loud feels like opening a door. I always prayed before I read those books. I thought that was enough. But I've learned that even when you mean well, something can still come through. It was a summer night in 2001 when it happened. The kind of night where the air is thick and still, and the crickets hum just outside your window. I'd spent the evening reading, and as I closed my book and laid down, something changed. The room went cold. I don't mean a draft. I mean ice cold, like the air itself had been sucked out and replaced with something else. The warmth of the night was gone, and with it, the feeling of being alone. I pulled the covers up, but couldn't shake it. Something was off. I thought about grabbing a blanket from the hallway, but the idea of stepping outside my room suddenly felt dangerous. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up around 1:15 a.m. The light in the living room was on. I heard a soft clink, like a coffee mug being set on the counter. It was a sound I knew well. My mom always had hot cocoa before bed, but it was way too late for her to be up. And I knew, without a doubt, the lights were off when I went to sleep. The clink came again, Then, silence. The lights turned off on their own. A chill rolled through me. The hum of the refrigerator, the chirping outside, all gone. The world had gone quiet. Too quiet. That's when I felt it. Something was in the room with me. Not footsteps, not breathing. Just presence. Like the air itself had weight. It pressed against my chest, slow and steady, like it was trying to pull something out of me. And then, a whisper. "Luke." I opened my eyes, and I wish I hadn't. There, floating in the corner of the room, was a girl, or maybe what used to be a girl. She had long black hair that hung like a veil across her face. Her skin was pale, almost blue, and she had no arms, no legs, just a tattered white gown, like something you'd see at a baptism or a funeral. She didn't move, but I knew she was waiting. Then came the voice again, not hers, something deeper, raspier, like it came from behind my walls. "Luke, power. You can have it. I'll prove to you I'm real. You want power? Take it." And then, from somewhere else, something softer. "Wake up." I shot upright in bed, gasping for breath. The room was quiet again. No shadows. No whispers. Just a dream, I told myself. But then, I saw it. The kitchen light was on. And as I stared down the hallway, frozen, I heard it again. "Watch." The light flicked off. And then, all hell broke loose. Every alarm in the house started going off. My clock. The oven timer. Even the smoke detectors. I scrambled out of bed and flipped the light switch. Nothing. The house was completely dead. No electricity. But somehow, the alarms kept screaming. I ran into the kitchen. The fridge light was out. The ceiling fan was dead. But that oven timer, still blinking, still screaming. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside to the breaker box. My dad's an electrician. He always showed me how to reset it in case of storms. But when I opened the box, my heart dropped. Every single switch had been flipped off. That never happens. One might trip, maybe two, but all of them, no way. And yet, despite the power being completely out, the alarms had been going. Some of them didn't even have backup batteries. I reset everything, and finally, the house went quiet. I just stood there, staring at the breaker box, cold sweat dripping down my back. I knew what I'd felt. I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a dream. Something came into my room that night. Something offered me power. And when I refused, it decided to prove itself. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the living room floor, lights on, praying for whatever it was to leave and never come back. To this day, I don't mess with anything related to the occult. I don't read about it. I don't speak about it unless I have to, because I've seen what can happen when you open the wrong door, even if just a crack. Whatever it was, it knew my name. It knew where I lived, and it knew how to get in. Do you believe in things like that? Have you ever felt something watching you, even when you were alone? Let me tell you a story, one that started when I was just a toddler. Back when I was about 3 years old, my family, my parents, my older brother, and I lived in a creaky old house just outside a small town in Pennsylvania. I don't remember the name of the place, but my dad once told me the people who owned the house before us were deep into occult stuff. Symbols etched into the woodwork, strange books left behind in the attic. Even at that age, I refused to sleep in my room. I used to tell my parents that there were people in there, not just shadows, actual people. I don't recall much from that time, but according to my dad, I would drag my entire mattress out of the room every night and lay it right in front of their bedroom door. I was 3, way too little to move that thing on my own. When they asked me why, I'd simply say, "The bad man keeps talking to me." After that, things were quiet. We moved. Life moved on. For years, there was nothing. Until I turned 13. It was winter break. My mom had the week off and I'd just woken up. I was still lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when a voice suddenly pierced the silence. "Oh God, help me, please help." The scream jolted me upright. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I rushed to my mom, expecting her to be the one who'd yelled, but when I got to her, she looked up from her coffee, completely calm. "No," she said, confused. "I'm fine. I didn't hear anything." I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I'd imagined it, a dream bleeding into reality. But half an hour later, another voice came, softer this time, but clearer. "Hey, why didn't you help me?" That's when everything shifted. A few nights later, I had a friend over. We were goofing around in my room, lights off, just talking and laughing, when something moved across the wall. A shadow, darker than the dark. But there were no lights on, no windows open, nothing that could have cast it. I whispered, "Do you see that?" She looked around, confused. "See what?" The shadow drifted toward the hallway. Just then, my dad opened the door to tell us to keep it down. He stepped inside, stopped, and looked around with a strange expression. "Why is it so cold in here?" he asked, rubbing his arms. He didn't wait for a reply, just told us to move to my room instead. A few weeks later, I woke up in the dead of night, and there he was, a dark figure standing right over me. The soft blue light from my old stereo barely lit the room, but it was enough to see his shape. Tall, still, shadowy. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I screamed and buried myself under the blankets, refusing to come out until the sun came up. Months passed. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, that I'd imagined it all. Until it happened again. This time I woke to see him standing at the foot of my bed, and he wasn't alone. There was a little girl in front of him. She wore a white vintage-style dress, looked like something out of the 1800s. Her eyes were sad, but calm. I knew somehow she wasn't dangerous, but the man behind her, he was different, heavy, dark, menacing. I squeezed my eyes shut and didn't open them again until daylight. Eventually, my dad and I moved again, this time to a quiet little town in Ohio. A fresh start, I thought, but the strange things followed us. The very first morning in our new place, my dad heard someone say hello. He replied casually, assuming it was me. Later that day, he asked why I had been up so early. I told him I wasn't. He paused. "But I heard you." Later, while I was getting ready for school, I heard it too. A soft hi. A man's voice. I figured Dad had come back in for something, but when I checked, no one was there. That whole year, we kept seeing strange lights, floating orbs that danced around corners. Objects moved. Cold spots appeared and vanished. Eventually, we learned the family who had lived there before had all died in a freak bus accident on their way to a reunion. So we moved again. We move a lot. But this house? This one's the worst. It's an old farmhouse at the edge of town, with sagging floorboards and vines crawling up the porch. From the moment we moved in, it felt off, like the walls were watching. Almost every night, something happens. There's an old man who walks through my room sometimes. I see him, clear as day, though he's not solid, faded. His beard is long and wiry, almost Amish, and every time he passes my bed, he glares at me like I've done something wrong. The lights flicker on by themselves. Doors creak open. Even during summer, the house stays cold, bone cold, and we don't even have central air. Then there's the guitar. I'll leave it in the living room, and by morning, it's standing upright in the kitchen. My dad wouldn't touch it. He treats guitars like sacred relics. And her, the little girl in white, I've seen her again. She's still following me. My dad doesn't see anything, but I do, all the time. My Nana sees things too. She's had that ability her whole life. I don't know what they want. I don't know if I'm supposed to help them or banish them. I just know they're still here. What would you do? I'm so tired of being scared out of my mind every single night. I live in a small rural town called Silver Pines, Oregon, and this is what happened to me 2 Saturdays ago, on August 12th. It was around 5:30 p.m., and I was out walking alone. Normally, I would have had my dog, Charlie, with me, but she was recovering from an eye infection and didn't have the energy to join. Silver Pines is a quiet place nestled along the edge of the Cascades. It rains often, and this time of year, the trails and roadside ditches swell with runoff. Between homes, there are long stretches of unkempt land, patches of thick bramble, and weeds the town doesn't bother trimming back anymore. That evening, the wind had picked up. The trees were whispering overhead as I crossed a narrow concrete bridge not far from my street. That's when I heard it. Breathing, heavy and slow, rising from the ditch below. At first, I figured it was some homeless guy sleeping it off under the bridge, which honestly wouldn't be too weird around here. But then, something surfaced in my mind. An old memory I hadn't thought about in years. It was from when Charlie and I were out on a jog in the woods behind town. I'd veered off the main path and was running along the edge of the brush when I nearly collided with a dog. Or, at least I think it was a dog. It was crouched in the tall grass, completely still, watching. Its mouth curled back just enough to show sharp, yellow teeth. That image came rushing back to me like a freight train. Suddenly uneasy, I hurried across the bridge and looked back from a safe distance. Nothing. No movement. Just beer cans and bits of trash tucked beneath the concrete. Still, something pulled me back. I stepped onto the bridge again, trying to pinpoint exactly where that breathing had come from. And then it started again. That same slow, guttural exhale. I leaned over the side, peering directly beneath the bridge. But again, there was nothing there. I started to stand up. And that's when it hit me. Hot breath. Right against my ear. It reeked. Like rotting meat, like something that had been gnawing on roadkill for days. I stumbled backward, my stomach churning, a wave of nausea crashing through me. I turned around, expecting to see someone, anything, standing behind me. But there was nothing. And yet, the breathing continued. Then came the pressure. I don't know how else to describe it, but something began pushing against my chest. Not with hands, not paws. Something in between. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, pinning me. And then, the howl. It wasn't just a sound. It was a full-body experience. A raw, savage cry that made my bones vibrate, right in front of me, out of nowhere. And with it, that memory of the crouching dog came back sharper than ever. I could see it, waiting in the grass, calculating, deciding just how close to let me get before it made its move. In that moment, I had the strangest thought. This was always going to happen. Like I'd escaped something once. A close call, a narrow miss, and now it had finally caught up to me. Like some part of the world had kept the receipt, and now it was time to settle the bill. Then, just like that, it was gone. I collapsed onto the bridge, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. I didn't move for what felt like forever. Eventually, I got up and walked home in a daze. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. About that presence. About the breath. The howl. And against every ounce of logic, I wanted to go back. I needed to know. It took 4 days. On Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., I went back to that bridge. Same place. Same time. And I waited. Nothing. No breathing. No pressure. No howl. Just quiet air and empty ditches. That's when it hit me, what drew it to me in the first place. Fear. I closed my eyes and thought of that memory again. The crouched dog. The bared teeth. The way my heart had raced. But now, nothing. I didn't feel afraid anymore. The image didn't hold power over me like it used to. I've been thinking a lot about that night. About what it really was. I don't think it was a ghost. Not in the way we usually think about ghosts. I don't believe it was ever human. I think, whatever it was, it created that breathing sound, like it was inviting me, giving me a choice, to face it, or to run. And when I came back, when I chose to face it, it showed me the one thing I feared the most. A dog. Maybe it was trying to help me deal with it, to force me to face something buried deep inside. Or maybe it needed my fear. Maybe it feeds on it. I don't know. But I do know this. We forget, sometimes, how close we are to the wild. And maybe, just maybe, something out there needs us to remember. This happened in Silver Springs, Oregon, in a house my relatives still live in to this day. I was around 10 years old when my aunt and uncle moved into a beautiful old Victorian-style home near the edge of town, right down the road from a quiet, weathered building that had once been a special education school. Before that, we later learned, it had been a retirement home decades ago. Just across the street stood a more modern assisted living facility, its lights always on, humming gently through the night. A few months after they moved in, my family visited for the weekend. I remember my two cousins and I playing in one of the upstairs bedrooms. I left for just a minute to grab a glass of water. When I came back, my cousin was still on the floor, pushing toy cars back and forth like nothing had changed. But someone else was in the room. Sitting calmly on the bed, watching him, was an elderly woman. She looked to be in her 90s, her gray hair swept back, her dress an outdated floral pattern you'd expect to see in an old photo album. At first, nothing about her felt threatening. Her presence was quiet, almost kind. I assumed she was someone from the other side of the family. Maybe a great aunt I hadn't met. Maybe she'd wandered in while I was gone and wanted to sit down. She didn't speak much, just sat there watching. Occasionally, she whispered something under her breath, soft and unclear, like she was talking to someone we couldn't see. Neither my cousin nor I said anything. We both just let her be. I guess we each thought the other knew who she was. But as the minutes passed, 10, 15, maybe 20, something began to shift. The stillness in the room felt heavier. Her silence started to unnerve me. Her smile, though faint, had a strange pull to it, like she knew something I didn't. I finally worked up the courage to say something, to ask who she was. But when I turned my head to face her, she was gone. No sound, no movement, just an empty spot on the bed, as if she had never been there at all. The room wasn't big. No one could have left unnoticed. Still, I told myself she must have slipped out quietly while we were distracted. Months passed. During a family get-together later that year, my cousin casually brought her up. He said she sometimes came into his room, or the upstairs bathroom, and would always ask the same thing. "Where's the little blonde girl?" Then he said something that chilled me to my core. "She likes you. She says you remind her of herself when she was younger." That stuck with me. If she wanted to find me, why didn't she ask my aunt or uncle? Why only speak to them? About a year later, we visited the house again. The moment we pulled into the driveway, my younger cousin ran out to greet us. I still remember what he said, so plainly. "Someone's been waiting to see you." I didn't think much of it until I stepped into his bedroom. She was there, sitting in the exact same spot on the bed, but something had changed. Her skin looked thinner, almost translucent. The air felt off, heavier, damp, with an awful smell I couldn't place, a mix of something rotting and old wood soaked in mildew. I covered my nose and jokingly accused my cousin of causing it, but when I looked at him, he just shrugged and kept playing, oblivious. The fear hit me then, hard and sudden. I backed toward the wall, frozen. The old woman didn't move. She simply watched me, her pale face tilted slightly, lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Not angry, not warm, just aware. I forced the words out. "Where do you come from?" She lifted one hand slowly, waved it through the air, vague and directionless. I tried again. "Are you from the assisted living home across the road?" She shook her head gently. I glanced over at my cousin for just a second. He was staring at his toys. Blank. When I turned back, she was gone. No trace. The air in the room suddenly lifted, lighter, like whatever she carried with her had been pulled away. I turned to my cousin and asked, "Did you hear anything she said?" He blinked at me. "What are you talking about? She just asked me to come get you. That was the last time I saw her." Years went by. The visits stopped. My cousins didn't talk about her anymore. Until one night. My cousin, older now, was half asleep when he heard a voice. A woman's voice, soft and close. "You kids are all grown up now. I used to get so tired walking all the way from the home to visit." He sat straight up, heart racing, and asked his mom about the old woman in his room. She panicked. And after that, nothing else happened. The house stayed quiet, peaceful. Whatever she was, whatever she wanted, she never came back. As for me, I haven't stepped foot in that house again. I never talk about it with them. I can't. For a long time, I tried convincing myself it was a dream, childhood imagination, but when my cousin brought her up again just last year, something inside me sank. She was real as anything like this can be, and while she never seemed angry, it still unsettles me that she never spoke to me directly. I still wonder why she was there, and why it felt like I was the one she'd been waiting for all along. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. A few summers ago, my parents and I planned our usual getaway, something we did every year to recharge and reconnect. Normally, we booked our trips through well-known vacation rental sites, sticking with places that had lots of good reviews. But that year, we felt like trying something different. My mom stumbled on a listing through a small website, a rustic farmhouse in a quiet town called Pine Hollow, deep in the backwoods of Vermont. The pictures were beautiful. The house looked old but cozy, with exposed wood beams, a big yard, and just enough modern comforts to make it feel like home. The listing described it as peaceful and secluded, nestled near a sleepy town and just a short drive from a nearby lake. We called the owner to confirm the details. He sounded polite, a bit stiff, but willing to rent us the place for 2 full weeks. Excited, we left early one morning and made the drive from our home in Pennsylvania. It was a long haul, nearly 10 hours, and by the time we crossed into Vermont, the sky was already turning gold with sunset. We were tired but hopeful, looking forward to putting our feet up and soaking in that rural peace and quiet. The direction seemed simple enough. We passed a tiny school, a couple of sagging barns, and a scatter of houses. But just as quickly as we'd entered the town, we found ourselves right back on the highway, surrounded by nothing but thick trees and open fields. No sign of the rental. Puzzled, we turned around and retraced our steps slowly. That's when it hit us. Those old, run-down farm buildings we passed earlier. That was the place. We just sat there in silence for a moment. It looked nothing like the pictures. The photos had been taken at an angle that masked the decay. Up close, the house was weather-beaten and lonely, sitting in the middle of a cracked gravel yard. The paint was peeling, the roof sagged, and ivy clung to the chimney like it was trying to pull the house down into the earth. Still, we'd driven so far. We figured we'd at least take a look before making any decisions. The second we pulled into the driveway, something shifted. It's hard to explain, but all three of us felt it. Like the air got heavier. My dad later said it felt like we'd crossed some invisible line, like whatever lived there had noticed us. The yard was wild. Tall weeds pushed through the cracks in the stone path. The windows were open, their sheer curtains drifting outward as if reaching. There was a line of laundry hung across the back fence, flapping gently in the breeze. It looked fresh, but no one had mentioned a caretaker. No car was there. And in the middle of the yard, inside a makeshift wire enclosure, a peacock stood silently, its feathers dull and motionless, like it had forgotten how to move. We hesitated, but we were worn out from the drive and didn't want to jump to conclusions. My mom unlocked the front door, and we stepped inside. The kitchen was like something out of a different era. The tile was cracked and uneven, and an ancient cast iron stove took up half the space. The cabinets sagged on rusted hinges. Everything smelled faintly of mold and wood smoke, with a deep undertone of something sour. like fruit left too long on the counter. Upstairs, it got worse. The master bedroom was the least offensive, still creepy, but manageable. The floor slanted badly, and the dresser had a broken mirror with shards of glass beneath it. My room was strange, a narrow space with a tilted ceiling and a closet that was just a stick nailed to the wall behind a faded curtain. But it was the third bedroom that truly unnerved me. The door creaked when I pushed it open. A four-poster bed filled most of the room, its velvet curtains shredded and dangling. The air inside felt colder, not temperature cold, but emotionally cold, like someone disapproved of us being there. I stood frozen just inside the doorway, and it hit me. I was being watched. It wasn't imagination. It was that distinct, skin-prickling awareness you get when someone stands just behind you. I turned fast, but no one was there. Then I saw it. A painting hung across from the bed. Small. Harmless looking at first glance. Just a countryside scene. Rolling hills, a wooden fence, and a little girl in a white dress standing in the foreground. But she wasn't smiling. She wasn't even looking at the scenery. She was staring straight ahead and pointing at the bed. That was it. That was all we needed. We met downstairs and had a quick, tense discussion. Nobody argued. We just knew. We packed our things and left without touching anything else. We ended up finding a small family run-in about 20 minutes away. Cozy, friendly, clean. But even then, something about that house stayed with us. We tried to enjoy the rest of the trip, but the mood had shifted. After a few days, we decided to cut our vacation short and head home. Even now, years later, I still think about that house in Pine Hollow. Nothing moved, no one whispered, but it didn't matter. The silence said everything. And that painting, I can still see her face. Sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if we'd spent the night? Before we get into it, let me just say, I've always loved summer. The long days, the late sunsets, the chance to unplug and just be with family. That's why we jumped at the opportunity to spend 2 weeks at my husband's grandparents' old lake house in northern Michigan, right near a sleepy little town called Pine Hollow. The house was built in the early 50s, tucked into a quiet stretch of woods not far from Lake Huron. It had that classic cabin vibe, creaky wood floors, faded wallpaper, the faint scent of cedar lingering in every room. Nothing about it ever seemed spooky at first. No dark history, no tragic stories, just a cozy, peaceful retreat. But the things we experienced there, I still can't explain them. The first odd moment happened on our second night. The sun had already set, and I was in the kitchen when I heard my 8-year-old son yelling for me from the front yard. His voice was excited, not scared, so I rushed out thinking maybe he'd found a frog or something. When I got outside, he was kneeling by a patch of overgrown shrubs, pointing. "Mom, look," he said. Huddled in the brush was a tiny raccoon kit, curled up and trying to stay hidden. It scurried deeper into the bushes, but my son begged me to take a picture before it disappeared. I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos, but when I looked at the images, something wasn't right. Thick, black smudges covered the center of nearly every shot, blurry, swirling marks that made no sense. There was nothing in front of the lens, and I had the flash on. I chalked it up to condensation or dust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. The next day, we spent the afternoon by the lake. At low tide, the shoreline pulls way back, exposing slick stones, twisted driftwood, and pools of water alive with movement. Tiny fish, frogs, even a couple of crayfish. The kids were in heaven, hopping from one tide pool to the next, completely drenched and laughing the entire time. When the sun dipped low, we walked the short trail back to the house and turned in for the night. The following morning, I woke early to get breakfast going. I took my coffee out to the porch, hoping to enjoy a few quiet minutes before everyone else stirred. That's when I caught the smell. It hit hard, sharp, sour, and unmistakably foul. Like brine and decay, far worse than your usual lake stink. Curious and admittedly a little grossed out, I followed it toward the front path. And that's where I saw it. A dead crayfish, covered in ants. I looked around and saw another one, then another. 6 in total, scattered along the edge of the yard, nowhere near the waterline. My kids hadn't brought any back from the lake, and there was no logical way those things could have traveled up the trail and into the woods on their own. When I asked the family, they were just as puzzled. But that was only the beginning. Over the next several days, the weirdness escalated. Doors would creak open and slam shut when no one was nearby. At night, the kids swore they heard scratching on their bedroom doors. And sometimes, usually just as we were drifting off to sleep, we'd hear the faint laughter of a woman, followed by the hushed, gravelly murmur of a man. The words never made sense. They weren't in any language we knew. Our daughter, Emily, she's 12, seemed the most affected. She told us she kept seeing figures in the corners of rooms, flickering in and out of her vision. Her dreams turned dark and repetitive, the kind that leave you wide-eyed and shaking in the middle of the night. She started taking pictures around the house, hoping to prove to us what she was seeing. When I looked through them, I was floored. Almost every shot had glowing little orbs floating in the air, especially near the attic door. Another afternoon, I was photographing the kids down by the lake. Emily had just run off to explore a group of boulders when she stopped and grabbed her head, saying her ears were ringing. Later, while scrolling through the photos, I spotted something. In 4 of them, there was a faint, misty figure standing near the rocks, tall, human-shaped, and transparent. I hadn't seen anything at the time, but now I wish I had. The rest of our vacation was a mix of happy moments and eerie, lingering tension. We tried to make the best of it, campfires, card games, canoe rides. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was sharing that space with us. I don't know what it was. I just know we weren't alone. When I moved from California to a quiet town called Aspen Hollow, nestled deep in the mountains of Colorado, I was excited for a fresh start. It was the second half of my junior year, and I was staying with my dad's childhood friend, Marie, and her family, people I'd known forever. Their cabin-style home was cozy, filled with wood-paneled walls, the scent of pine, and the warmth of old memories. It felt safe, familiar. But during my first week there, something happened that still sends a chill down my spine. That night, I was up late, still struggling to adjust to the altitude and time change. It was around 3 a.m., and I was on a video call with my best friend, Liam, who had just moved to Chicago. I couldn't sleep. My head buzzed from the move, the quiet, the dark woods outside the windows. Earlier that night, I'd made myself a bowl of mac and eggs, my weird comfort combo. Now, realizing how late it had gotten, I decided to put my dish away before I accidentally woke anyone up. I told Liam to hang on, muted the call, grabbed my plate, and headed toward the kitchen. Their home had a strange layout. The living room and kitchen were separated by a narrow hallway that curved slightly, just enough so you could see into part of the kitchen from the hallway, but not be seen yourself. As I walked down that hall, a strange sensation washed over me, like the air had shifted, heavier, still. Then, just as I reached the corner, before I stepped into view, I heard a voice. It spoke clearly, low and measured. "What are you doing?" The phrasing caught me off guard. No one in the house had ever spoken to me that way. And more importantly, no one should have known I was awake. I hadn't made a sound. I froze, my breath caught somewhere between confusion and fear. Maybe Marie was up watching TV, but this voice wasn't hers. It was male, deep, calm. Then again, firmer this time. "What are you doing?" It didn't sound angry, but it wasn't exactly kind either. It felt like someone checking in, not to comfort, but to control. My heart thudded in my chest as I stepped slowly into the kitchen, and that's when I saw it. A silhouette, seated on the far end of the living room couch, just past the pool of moonlight spilling through the window. It wasn't Marie. It wasn't her husband, David, and it definitely wasn't their daughter, Emily. I stood there, my plate still in hand, rooted to the floor. Every nerve screamed to run, but somehow I moved forward. I walked to the dishwasher, opened it, placed the plate inside, and tried to pretend everything was normal. I didn't look over. I didn't say a word, but I felt the weight of its gaze pressing against my back, watching, waiting. A cold sweat slid down the back of my neck. My hands shook as I closed the dishwasher. Still, I didn't turn around. Instead, I walked calmly, mechanically, back toward the hallway. The second I passed through it, a strange weight lifted, but whatever it was, it hadn't left. I could still feel it. I didn't stop. I didn't glance over my shoulder. I made it to my room, shut the door quietly, then locked it with trembling hands. I sat back down in front of my laptop, unmuted the call, and forced myself into conversation with Liam like nothing had happened. But sleep, that wasn't happening. I had hoped that coming to Aspen Hollow meant leaving behind the strange things I'd experienced back in California, the shadows that slid across walls when no one else was home, the whispers I'd hear behind me just as I drifted off to sleep, the feeling that something was always nearby. But that night, I understood something I'd never wanted to believe. These things, whatever they are, they don't care where you are. They follow, and they're always waiting. Underscore 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 underscore. What do you think it was? Have you ever felt like something was watching you when no one else was around? Let me know. I'm not sure I was ever truly alone. Before I start the story, I want you to keep something in mind. Not everything that follows you is visible. Some things cling to you in silence, waiting. When I moved from California to a small town called Pine Lake, Washington, for the second half of my junior year, I figured the change would do me good. I've been dealing with some strange stuff back home. Whispers in the middle of the night. Shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. So when my mom's college friend offered to let me stay with her family while I reset a few things in my life, I said yes. Their place was this cozy, two-story craftsman house at the edge of town. Surrounded by tall trees, it had that classic small-town charm. Creaky floors, flickering porch light, and a fireplace that made the whole living room glow. I'd known the family since I was a kid. It felt familiar, safe, at least at first. It was during my first week there, my sleep schedule still wrecked from the move, that something happened I still can't explain. That night, I was up way too late, around 3 a.m., texting my best friend back in California. I was sitting on the bed with my laptop open, the glow from the screen lighting up the room. I'd made myself a plate of scrambled eggs and leftover spaghetti earlier. Don't judge, it's my weird comfort food, and figured I should take the plate back to the kitchen before I woke someone up. I told my friend to hold on, grabbed my dish, and padded down the hallway in my socks. Now the layout of the house was a little unusual. The kitchen was tucked off to the side, and from a certain spot in the hallway, you could see part of it without being seen yourself. As I got closer, a weird sensation crawled over me, like that prickly feeling you get when someone's watching you. I brushed it off. Old houses make weird noises. But just as I reached the end of the hallway, right before I stepped into view of the kitchen, I heard a voice. It said, very clearly, in a deep male voice, "What are you doing?" I froze. It wasn't angry or threatening. It was calm, almost protective. But what chilled me was the tone, formal, distant, and no one in that house ever talked to me like that. More importantly, no one should have known I was awake. I hadn't made a sound. I tried to convince myself it was Karen, the woman I was staying with. Maybe she was watching a movie in the living room. But the voice wasn't hers, and it definitely wasn't her husband's or their teenage daughter's. This voice sounded older, worn, then, again, a little firmer. "What are you doing?" Something about it made my stomach turn. I stepped into the kitchen, every part of me alert, and that's when I saw it. A silhouette, seated on the couch, just beyond the edge of the hallway light. Not Karen, not her husband, not their daughter. Just a figure, still, watching. I stood there, gripping the plate, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Instead, I walked to the sink, pretending I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. I slid the plate into the dishwasher, trying to keep my hands from shaking. The presence never moved, but I could feel its eyes locked on me the whole time. I didn't dare look directly at it. As soon as I turned back toward the hallway, something lifted, like a weight leaving my chest. But the feeling that someone was watching me never faded. I didn't look back. I walked calmly to my room, shut the door, and locked it. Then I stayed up for the rest of the night, my laptop screen the only light, my friends still texting me jokes I couldn't laugh at. I had hoped moving would give me a fresh start, that I'd left behind whatever had followed me for years. But that night I realized something I'd been afraid to admit. You don't escape things like this. They don't care about where you go. They only care about where you are. What do you think it was? Have you ever felt like something was watching you, even when you were alone? I didn't talk about this for over 10 years. Not to my friends. Not to my family. Not even to a therapist. You can call me Danny. I grew up in Pine Hollow, a quiet town tucked into the Oregon hills, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and secrets still travel faster than the mail. What makes this worth sharing isn't just the story itself, but where I come from. My father was a spiritual healer, the kind some folks in town quietly called the ghost whisperer. He believed in energy, in curses, in things most people wave off as superstition. I, on the other hand, was always the skeptic in the family, a psychology major, logic-driven, analytical, the kind of person who prefers data over dreams. But no matter how deep into science I go, I still can't explain what happened to me. It started when I was 9. My family lived in a small guest house behind my grandparents' place. On one side was a Baptist church with stained glass windows and a rusted bell that never rang. On the other side, an abandoned house, long forgotten and covered in ivy. It always felt off. My parents and my older brother lived with me in the back house. Up front, my grandparents, my uncle, aunt, and 5 cousins crammed into a 2-story craftsman with creaky stairs and a big wraparound porch. We were close. Summers were spent running barefoot through the grass, playing tag, hide and seek, flashlight wars. It was before social media, before smartphones, when adventure started the moment the sun dipped low and the porch lights came on. But even with all those memories, I never felt like I belonged. Maybe it was because I was adopted. Maybe it was because my grandmother never really accepted my dad as her own. I felt the difference in the way they looked at me, in the way they didn't. My cousins never said anything, but I noticed. You always notice when love is rationed. One summer night, just as the sky was painted orange and purple with the last light of day, we were playing hide and seek. I was sprinting past the narrow space between the church and my grandparents' house, trying to find the perfect spot to vanish, when I felt this sudden, stabbing pinch under my ribs. I stopped and yanked up my shirt, confused, and a fat little silkworm dropped onto the gravel. I brushed it off, muttered something under my breath, and checked the spot. Just a red dot. Nothing serious. Then everything shifted. The colors disappeared. The noise vanished. It was like someone had erased the world around me. There was no darkness, no light, just a void. And then I noticed the basement window. It was set low into the church foundation, caked in dirt, the glass nearly opaque. Inside was nothing but pitch black. Or at least, I thought it was nothing. Until 2 red eyes blinked open. They weren't glowing. Not exactly. But they were the only thing in that void that seemed real. Solid. A deep, simmering red like hot coals staring right at me. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The world was frozen. And yet, I didn't feel scared. Not at first. What I felt was a crushing wave of loneliness, the kind that wraps around your chest and squeezes until your heart slows to a crawl. I don't know how long I stood there. A second? A year? Time didn't feel real. Then I blinked, and the world snapped back. Sound came rushing in. The wind. The laughter of my cousins echoing across the yard. I could move again. So I ran. I didn't care where. I just hid, wedged between the porch and some bushes, trying to shake off what had just happened. But I knew. Something had seen me. And I had seen it too. After that, things started going wrong. Slowly. Quietly. I got sick a lot. Had nightmares. Felt watched all the time. Middle school hit hard. I sank into a depression I couldn't explain. I started seeing things. Faces in mirrors. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Whispers behind me when I was alone. Still, I didn't say a word. Not until 2009. I was driving home from my shift at Best Buy. Just a normal Tuesday night, when something darted across the freeway. It was fast, black, and solid. I swerved hard, tires screeching across the lane, heart pounding. But when I looked back, nothing. Not even a shadow. I made it home, shaken, nerves buzzing. But just as I pulled into the driveway, I heard a strange rattle coming from under the hood. I'd only had the car for 2 days. I got out, popped the hood, and found the washer on the timing belt bolt hanging loose. One more turn, and it would have fallen off completely. At 70 miles per hour, that could have killed me. That's when I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I ran inside, woke up my parents, and told them everything. The red eyes, the years of shadows and whispers, the overwhelming feeling that something had been following me ever since that summer night. My dad didn't hesitate. He gathered sage, candles, and salt. My mom filled bowls with water and placed them in corners of the room. They called it a cleansing ritual, an attempt to push out whatever had attached itself to me. But nothing changed. So my mom took me to see someone, an old woman who lived near the edge of town. People called her a seer, but most just said she was a gypsy behind her back. She read palms, told fortunes, lit candles in the windows that never seemed to blow out. I didn't buy it. Still don't. But my mom had already paid her fee, so I sat down and let her take my hand. The moment her fingers wrapped around mine, her face changed. She said things she shouldn't have known, private things, painful memories. And then she whispered something that made my stomach drop. She told me about the eyes. Said they belonged to someone in my bloodline. A grandmother I had never met. My biological grandmother. She said this woman had placed a curse on me as a baby, angry that I hadn't been raised by the family she wanted. She had been watching me ever since. The seer gave me a bundle of dried twigs and weeds, tied tightly into the shape of a bird's nest. Told me to keep it near my bed. Said it would protect me. And for a while, it worked. The house was still. My sleep was deep. No voices. No shadows. For the first time in years, I felt peace. But peace never lasts. It started with the closet. Every night, I'd close it, pull it tight, sometimes even push a chair in front of it. But every morning, it was open. Just a few inches. Just enough. And I swear, on more than one morning, I felt the faintest breath of cold air spilling out. Like something had been watching me from the dark. In 2006, my family found a new place to live in the small town of Pine Lake, just outside the local high school I would soon attend. It felt like a stroke of luck. One of my parents' friends knew someone who had a rental available, and before we knew it, we were settling in. The house was split into 2 living spaces, and the elderly couple who owned it lived in the back half. They were kind, almost like an extension of our family, always bringing over food and stopping by to chat. Since we were also Filipino, their hospitality felt familiar, like home. The house had a strange layout. When you walked in through the front door, you immediately entered the living room, and a long hallway stretched ahead. My parents' bedroom was on the left at the start of the hall, while mine was further down on the right. At the very end of the hallway was another door that led directly into the elderly couple's bedroom. The washer and dryer were in their room, so we often used that door to cut through and do laundry. Then, in 2008, everything changed. The old man was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and just a week after he passed, his wife followed him unexpectedly. She had seemed fine up until then, but during his last days, she suddenly fell ill. When my mom visited her in the hospital, the last thing she said to her was, "Rebecca is such a sweet girl. You are very lucky." I didn't know about this conversation until later. After they were gone, the house felt different. Their warmth had disappeared, replaced by an eerie quiet. A few weeks passed, and strange things started happening. One morning, my dad was out of the country, and my mom and I were home alone. She had put a load of laundry in the washer before coming outside to help me wash the car. I was about to start spraying the car when she suddenly called for me. I went inside and walked down the hall, stopping at the open door to their old room. My mom was standing there, holding something in her hands, looking confused. "Did you put this here?" she asked. She was holding a heavy steel pasta strainer, placed perfectly in the center of the washing machine, face up, as though someone had deliberately set it there. I froze, a chill running down my spine. "No," I answered quickly, turning to rush back outside. There was no logical explanation. The shelves above the washer were deep, and anything that fell would have landed on the floor, not on the machine. What was even more unsettling was that I had been the last person to touch that strainer. A few days before the old woman passed, she had asked me to place it on the highest shelf, behind a stack of glass bowls and steel pots. Everything else was untouched, just the strainer. Soon after, the landlord moved the washer and dryer out of their room, and we no longer needed to use that hallway door. Instead, we started going through the back entrance. In Filipino culture, it's believed that a spirit lingers for 40 days after death, visiting familiar places before moving on. A ceremony is held on the 40th day to help the soul find peace. The first one was for the old man, held in the backyard. Before heading out, my parents and I locked all the doors and turned off the lights. While we were outside, the landlord's grandchildren, including Chris, the oldest, and his younger siblings, were hanging out in the old couple's room. At some point, Chris came outside, looking uneasy. He told my mom they had heard footsteps in our house. "We heard someone walking," he said, "and doors opening and closing. The wooden floors creaked with every step, so they were sure someone was inside." Alarmed, my parents, the landlord, Chris, and I rushed inside to check. Every door was still locked, the lights were off, and everything was exactly how we had left it. The landlord stood silently for a moment, then said it was my father walking through the house one last time. A week later, we held the same ceremony for the old woman. Her sister and nephew flew in from Chicago to attend. I overheard them talking about staying the night in her room, which had its own bathroom. Since their room was right next to mine, I could hear everything: footsteps, the sink running, the toilet flushing, and muffled voices through the walls. It was comforting to know someone was finally in that room. After the couple passed, I had been sleeping in the living room, uneasy about how close my room was to theirs. But that night, knowing someone was there, I decided to sleep in my own bed. The second night was much the same: footsteps, the sounds of moving around, and water running. At some point, I wondered how long they would stay. I got up in the middle of the night and glanced out the window. Their rental car was gone. I thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked my mom, "How are the guests doing?" She gave me a confused look. "I don't know. I haven't really seen or heard from them." Something about her answer didn't sit right. "But they stayed over, right? I heard them last night." Concerned, my mom called the landlord. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I overheard the conversation. They never stayed the night.